Memory isn't what most people think it is. We imagine it as a simple filing cabinet in our heads, storing perfect copies of our experiences that we can pull out whenever we need them. But scientists have discovered something far more surprising. Memory is alive, constantly changing, and remarkably unreliable in ways that would shock you. Every time you remember something, you're not just retrieving it, you're actually rebuilding it from scattered pieces. And each time you do this, the memory can change. What feels like your most vivid, certain recollection might be partially invented by your own mind, blended with other experiences, or influenced by things that happened long after the original event. The more researchers study memory, the more they realize how wrong our basic assumptions have been. Your brain isn't trying to be a perfect recorder of your life, it's trying to help you survive and make sense of the world, even if that means quietly editing your past without you knowing it. We'll explore these surprising truths about memory in this video and discover how this invisible process shapes everything about who you are. If you like these videos, I would appreciate if you clicked like or subscribed, as it's important for the channel and it helps others find it too, just like you did. Thank you. Now, let's get started. The brain reaches for information every single day, and this reaching process reveals something profound about how we actually learn. When you close a book and try to explain what you just read, something interesting happens inside your mind. The struggle to pull those ideas back out strengthens the very pathways that will deliver them to you later. This is completely different from the warm, comfortable feeling of reading the same paragraph over and over again. That comfortable feeling can actually fool us. Smooth recognition makes us think we truly know something, but recognition and recall live in different neighborhoods of memory. You might recognize a face instantly, yet struggle to remember where you met that person. The brain treats these as separate skills, and only one of them gets you through an exam or helps you solve a real problem. Memory networks in your brain connect related ideas like invisible threads. When you search for one specific word, dozens of similar words light up at the same time. This creates an interesting problem. Sometimes the wrong word becomes so loud that it drowns out the one you actually want. Think about those moments when you know a song title starts with a certain letter. You can almost hear the melody, but the only title that comes to mind is completely wrong. This is your brain's associative network in action. Words that sound similar, or appear together in your past experience, become linked. The network keeps searching, even when you give up consciously. Minutes or hours later, that elusive word can pop into awareness seemingly from nowhere. Your unconscious mind was still working, still testing connections, still following threads through the maze of everything you have ever learned. The tip of the tongue phenomenon shows us that memory is not like opening a file cabinet. It is more like a detective following clues through a living, breathing city of information. Sometimes the detective takes wrong turns. Sometimes it needs to rest and try a different route, but the search continues in the background of awareness. Sleep plays a fascinating role in this process. While you rest, your brain reorganizes these memory networks, creating new bridges between ideas that seemed unconnected before. This is why solutions can arrive in the morning that were impossible to find the night before. The landscape of your knowledge has literally been rearranged while you slept. Creative insight follows this same pattern of unconscious searching. The scientist who suddenly understands a complex equation while walking to lunch, the writer who finds the perfect phrase while washing dishes. These moments feel magical because the real work happened below the surface of awareness. The brain was busy trying combinations, testing possibilities, linking old knowledge to new problems in ways that consciousness could never track. When insight finally strikes, it arrives with a distinctive feeling of certainty, a mental click that says, "This is right." This confidence makes sense, because the unconscious mind has already tested the solution against everything it knows. By the time the answer reaches awareness, it has been verified by networks throughout the brain. This is why forcing insight rarely works. Pressure tends to lock the mind into obvious pathways, the same routes that already failed to produce an answer. Stepping away reduces this pressure and allows the brain to explore alternative connections. The break is not giving up, it is changing the conditions that allow discovery. Memory formation itself is far more complex than most people imagine. Every experience gets filtered through networks of existing knowledge, colored by current emotions, and shaped by what you expect to happen next. This means that memory is never a pure recording of events. It is always a reconstruction, a creative act that blends fact with interpretation. This reconstructive nature explains why two people can witness the same event, yet remember it quite differently. Each brain processes the experience through its own unique web of associations, priorities, and past experiences. Neither person is lying or confused. They are simply demonstrating how memory actually works. The act of remembering changes the memory itself. Each time you recall an experience, you strengthen certain details while others fade. The story becomes more streamlined, more coherent, but also less complete than the original experience. This is not a flaw in the system, it is a feature. Memory is designed to extract meaning and patterns, not to serve as a perfect archive. Forgetting, surprisingly, is just as important as remembering. A brain that could never forget would be paralyzed by irrelevant details. The ability to let go of unnecessary information allows the important patterns to emerge more clearly. This is why sleep helps consolidate memories. It does not just strengthen them, it decides which ones deserve to survive. When you try to explain something to another person, your brain suddenly can't hide behind that comfortable feeling of recognizing information. You have to actually pull the knowledge out, piece by piece, and arrange it in a way that makes sense. This process reveals the holes in your understanding faster than any test ever could. The moment you start stumbling over your words, that's when you found the boundary of what you actually know versus what you only think you know. There's something profound about this kind of discovery. We spend so much time collecting facts and ideas, but we rarely test whether we truly possess them, or if they're just floating around in our heads like half-remembered dreams. When you teach, you're forced to translate everything into your own language, your own examples, your own connections. This translation creates pathways in your memory that are uniquely yours, making the information easier to find later. The act of serving someone else's understanding also changes how your brain approaches the material. Instead of passively absorbing, you become an active architect of knowledge. Your attention sharpens because there's purpose beyond just cramming information into your head. You don't need a formal classroom for this either. You can explain concepts to your dog, record voice notes to yourself, or simply imagine teaching the idea to a curious child. The speed at which we process information can dramatically change how deeply we learn it. When you write by hand, your fingers can't keep up with every single word being spoken or every thought racing through your mind. This limitation forces your brain to become selective, to summarize, to choose what matters most. That act of choosing is where real learning happens. Your hand moving across paper creates a physical memory alongside the mental one. The motor patterns of forming letters and words become another pathway back to the information. People often notice that their handwritten notes, even when they're messy and incomplete, feel more connected to their understanding than perfectly typed documents. The messiness itself can be a sign of thinking in action. Typing can trick us into believing we're learning when we're really just creating transcripts. The ease and speed of keyboards can encourage us to capture everything without processing anything. But when your pen forces you to slow down, to ask what the main point is, to decide which examples matter, you're doing the mental work that transforms information into understanding. Sleep plays a mysterious role in how memories solidify. After you study something new, there's a period where that knowledge exists in a fragile state, like a photograph still developing. While you sleep, your brain gets to work behind the scenes, strengthening connections and filing information in more permanent storage. This process can make recall feel effortless the next day, even though you didn't practice at all. Musicians experience this phenomenon regularly. A piece that feels clumsy and difficult at night can flow smoothly the following morning. The improvement seems to come from nowhere, but it's actually the result of your sleeping brain, organizing and consolidating what you practiced. This is why cramming late into the night often backfires. You might gain temporary familiarity with material, but you miss out on the deeper consolidation that only happens during rest. There's wisdom in knowing when to step away from your books, when to trust that your brain will continue working, even after you stop consciously trying. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do for your memory is absolutely nothing at all. Movement has a remarkable effect on how freely our thoughts can flow. When you start walking, your body shifts out of its defensive, focused posture into something more open and relaxed. This physical change signals to your nervous system that it's safe to let the mind wander, to make loose associations, to search through memories without pressure. You've probably experienced this yourself, suddenly remembering someone's name or solving a problem that had been nagging you right in the middle of a casual walk. The steady rhythm of footsteps, the gentle changes in your environment, the absence of screens and notifications, all create conditions where stuck thoughts can finally break free. Walking provides a natural metronome for your thoughts. The repetitive motion can make speech feel smoother. Ideas flow more easily, memories surface more readily. This is why many people pace when they're trying to work through complex problems or rehearse important presentations. The body becomes a partner to the mind, rather than just a vessel carrying it around. When you feel mentally stuck, when the harder you try to remember something, the more elusive it becomes, movement can be the key that unlocks what you're searching for. Instead of sitting there forcing your brain to produce answers, you can let it search while your body moves through space, creating the conditions where memories are most likely to emerge on their own. Memory is like a muscle that gets stronger each time you use it. When you try to remember something, you're actually building a pathway in your brain. Think of it like walking through a field. The more you take the same route, the clearer the path becomes. This is why testing yourself works better than just reading something over and over again. Even when reading feels easier, your brain isn't really learning as much. The struggle you feel when trying to recall information isn't a sign that you're failing. It's actually your brain doing important work, rebuilding those pathways and making them stronger. It's fascinating how our minds can trick us into thinking that easy equals effective, but often the opposite is true. The effort itself is what creates lasting memory. Each time you successfully pull information from your memory, you're essentially practicing a skill. You're training your brain to find that information faster next time. It's similar to how athletes practice their moves over and over, but instead of muscle memory, you're building mental pathways. This kind of practice doesn't just help you remember facts, it also builds confidence when you're talking with other people, because you know you can access what you've learned. Your nose has a secret connection to your past that's more powerful than almost anything else. Smell travels directly to parts of your brain that handle emotions and memories. This is why catching a whiff of something can instantly transport you back in time. Maybe it's the scent of sunscreen that suddenly brings back a summer vacation from decades ago, or a particular soap that reminds you of your grandmother's house. These smell memories are so vivid because scents get tangled up with all the other details of our daily lives. They're present during important moments, during ordinary moments, during meals and celebrations, and quiet afternoons. Unlike other memories that we might talk about and reshape over time, smell memories often stay exactly as they were first formed. They sit quietly in our minds until the right trigger comes along. When a familiar scent hits you, it doesn't feel like regular remembering. It's more like being suddenly immersed in another time and place. Your brain isn't searching through files, it's being flooded with sensation. The experience is so complete, so immediate, that it can feel almost supernatural. Taking a short nap after learning something new can actually save that information from disappearing. When you keep cramming new tasks into your day right after studying, all that new input can interfere with the delicate process of memory formation. A brief nap acts like hitting the save button on your brain's computer. People often wake up from these short naps with a clearer understanding of what felt confusing before. Names that were slipping away become more solid. Connections between ideas become clearer. The nap doesn't need to last for hours. Even 20 or 30 minutes can shift your brain into a different mode, one that's focused on storing information rather than constantly taking in new stuff. It's like closing all the tabs on your computer. When it starts running slowly, You give your mental processing power a chance to catch up and organize. When you wake up, your mind has fewer competing demands, and you can return to learning with better focus. There's nothing lazy about strategic napping. It's actually a sophisticated tool for memory enhancement. Physical movement does something remarkable for your brain's ability to remember and learn. When you exercise, your heart pumps more blood and oxygen to your brain tissue, which can sharpen your thinking in the moment. But the benefits go much deeper than that temporary boost. Regular movement actually changes your brain's chemistry in ways that support learning over time. It helps maintain the flexible connections between brain cells that allow you to adapt and grow mentally. Many people notice this as a feeling of mental brightness after a workout, not just physical tiredness, but actual clarity of thought. Exercise also helps regulate the stress chemicals that can cloud your thinking and interfere with memory formation. When your stress response is more balanced, your brain has a better environment for storing and retrieving information. You don't need to become a marathon runner to get these benefits. Consistency matters more than intensity. A regular walking routine can be enough to notice changes in how well you remember your daily experiences. Light plays a crucial role in memory that most people never think about. Your brain uses light signals to keep track of time, and this internal clock affects how alert and mentally sharp you feel throughout the day. Getting bright light in the morning helps set this clock properly, which makes it easier to fall asleep at night when your brain needs to do its memory consolidation work. When you expose yourself to bright lights in the evening, especially from screens and indoor lighting, you can push your internal clock later. This might not seem like a big deal, but it can shorten your sleep or make it less restorative. The next day, even if you slept for 8 hours, you might feel mentally foggy and have trouble concentrating. It's not just about how long you sleep, but about how well your sleep timing aligns with your brain's natural rhythms. This is why stepping outside into morning sunlight can feel like hitting a reset button for your whole system, and why dimming lights in the evening can help your mind prepare for the deep, memory-strengthening sleep that comes with proper timing. Your brain's relationship with light runs much deeper than simple vision. Light is actually information that helps coordinate all the complex processes that keep your memory sharp and reliable from day to day. Water plays a bigger role in thinking than most people realize. The brain operates through delicate chemical reactions, and even slight changes in hydration can throw these processes off balance. When your body loses just a small amount of water, your ability to focus starts to slip away. This happens because attention is the foundation that memory needs to build new pathways. You might notice this as a kind of mental heaviness, where words don't come as easily, or where tasks that normally feel manageable suddenly seem frustrating. The brain depends on steady blood flow to deliver oxygen and nutrients, and dehydration reduces blood volume in ways that slow this delivery down. The strange thing is, you don't need to feel desperately thirsty for these changes to happen. Many people adapt to running slightly dehydrated, accepting mental cloudiness as just part of their normal state, but often that fog isn't normal at all. A simple glass of water won't transform anyone into a brilliant thinker, but it can quietly remove a barrier that was making everything harder than it needed to be. When the brain's internal environment stays stable, forming new memories shifts from feeling like work to feeling more natural. There's something almost philosophical about how such a basic need connects to our highest mental functions. The act of forgetting isn't really about failure, even though it often feels that way. Your brain actively chooses to let certain memories fade, and this process serves important purposes. Every single day floods your mind with countless pieces of information, and if your brain tried to hold on to all of it with equal strength, finding anything useful would become nearly impossible. So the brain deliberately weakens some connections, especially when information becomes outdated, gets repeated without meaningful context, or gets tangled up with distractions. This pruning creates space and reduces mental interference, making the memories that matter easier to access when you need them. Forgetting also keeps your mind flexible. It helps you update your understanding when the world around you changes. instead of keeping you locked into old patterns of thinking. Even during learning, forgetting can actually be helpful, because it creates a kind of effort during recall, and that effort can make the memories you do retrieve even stronger. When you have one of those blank moments, it's not always a sign that your memory is breaking down. Sometimes it's evidence that your mind is sorting through information, choosing signal over noise, even when the timing feels inconvenient. Sleep transforms into a filing system for your brain. While you're unconscious, your mind doesn't just shut down, it runs a complex night shift operation. Memories get sorted, strengthened, and reorganized in ways that make them more useful for tomorrow. Some experiences get replayed in rapid, compressed bursts during certain sleep stages, which helps transfer them from fragile, temporary storage into more permanent neural networks. Other details get trimmed away during this process, which might feel like forgetting, but often leads to clearer, more organized thinking. Sleep also helps separate meaningful information from random mental noise, so when you wake up, your brain carries less clutter. This explains why problems sometimes feel simpler after a good night's rest. It's not mysterious. It's your brain reshaping what it learned, so the information becomes easier to use later. When sleep gets cut short, this filing work gets rushed or completely skipped. You can still function the next day, but your mind ends up carrying scattered loose information instead of neatly organized mental folders. Music has an almost supernatural ability to bring back entire chapters of life. Sometimes just the first few notes of a familiar song can transport you completely to another time and place. Your body often reacts before your conscious mind even recognizes what's happening. Suddenly, you're back in a specific year, with specific people, in a specific location, with all the sensory details flooding back at once. This happens because songs often play during repeated experiences, during daily commutes, at parties, during relationships, at summer jobs. Your brain connects the music to those slices of life through repetition, and later the song becomes a trigger that carries multiple cues simultaneously. Timing, emotion, and context all arrive together like a wave. What feels almost magical is that these memories don't get reconstructed piece by piece. They return as complete atmospheres, fully formed and vivid. People with dementia sometimes demonstrate this connection in striking ways. Someone who struggles to recognize family members might sing along perfectly to an old song, then speak with surprising clarity for a few moments afterward. Music isn't just entertainment. It functions as a storage handle that can pull up deep mental drawers you forgot even existed. When we try to juggle multiple tasks at once, our brain doesn't actually split its attention like we might imagine. Instead, it's constantly flipping back and forth between different activities, like a frantic switchboard operator. Each time we make one of these mental switches, something gets lost in translation. Think of it like pausing a conversation mid-sentence, then trying to pick up exactly where you left off moments later. This switching comes with a hidden tax that we rarely notice in the moment. Our minds have to spend precious energy reconstructing what we were just thinking about. It's similar to losing your place in a book, then having to scan backward to find your spot again. The effort feels small, but it accumulates throughout the day. You've probably experienced this when reading something while a show plays in the background. You reach the end of the page and realize your eyes moved across every word, but your brain captured almost nothing. The information passed through without sticking, like water through a colander. This same principle explains why distracted driving creates such serious dangers. Our attention can't fully commit to processing the road while simultaneously handling a phone conversation. The brain misses crucial details because it never gave them complete focus in the first place. When we constantly hop between tasks, everything starts to feel surface level. We touch many different projects, but never dive deep enough into any single one to create strong, lasting memories. It's like skipping stones across a lake, never allowing ourselves to plunge beneath the surface where the real depth lies. Focusing on one thing at a time isn't just good advice, it's actually how our brains work best. Deep concentration gives our minds clean, clear information to file away and creates obvious pathways for finding that information later. Single tasking works with our biology rather than against it. Stress hormones play a fascinating role in how memories form and survive. When we encounter something stressful, our brains flood with chemicals designed to heighten awareness and prepare our bodies for action. These chemicals act like a highlighting pen, marking certain moments as critically important. If the stress level stays manageable and doesn't last too long, these highlighted memories often stick around with remarkable clarity. This explains why people can recall exactly where they stood when they heard shocking news, or remember vivid details from moments of mild danger. But when stress becomes overwhelming or drags on for extended periods, memory starts to break down in interesting ways. Instead of clear, continuous recollections, we end up with scattered snapshots. Like photographs torn from a sequence, the intense moments might remain sharp, but the ordinary details from the same time period often disappear entirely. This isn't a flaw in our mental design. It's actually a clever survival mechanism. During genuine emergencies, our brains prioritize rapid learning about immediate threats over carefully documenting the full experience. The system chooses quick adaptation over complete storytelling. This is why panicked cramming rarely works as well as calm, repeated study. A stressed brain is focused on escape, while a relaxed brain can afford to be curious and thorough. The mental state we're in when learning something heavily influences how well we'll remember it later. Perhaps most surprisingly, our memories aren't stored like video recordings that we simply replay when needed. Instead, remembering something is more like reconstructing a puzzle from scattered pieces. Each time we recall an event, our brain gathers fragments of information and rebuilds the experience from scratch. This reconstruction process has a peculiar side effect. While we're reassembling a memory, it becomes temporarily changeable, almost like wet paint that hasn't dried yet. New information can blend in, while old details might fade or shift. A conversation we have after remembering something can actually alter what we think happened originally. The mood we're in, the questions someone asks us, or even the setting where we're trying to remember can influence how we piece the memory back together. Once we've finished reconstructing it, this updated version gets filed away as the new official record. Over time, through countless acts of remembering and rebuilding, our memories gradually transform. Sharp, awkward details tend to smooth out, while the overall story starts to fit better with who we've become. Embarrassing moment from childhood might lose its sting, while a moment of triumph might gain extra significance. This ongoing revision isn't evidence that our minds are unreliable. It reveals something profound about what memory is actually for, rather than serving as a perfect recording device. Memory seems designed to extract meaning from our experiences and weave them into coherent stories that help guide our future choices. There are people walking among us who can recall what they ate for breakfast on any Tuesday from 15 years ago. They experience something called highly superior autobiographical memory, and their minds work like incredibly detailed recording devices. You give them a random date, say March 12, 2008, and they'll tell you it was a Wednesday, that they wore a blue sweater, and that it rained in the afternoon. Their brains seem to catalogue every single day with remarkable precision. But here's the thing, this gift can become a burden. Imagine never being able to forget your most embarrassing moment, or having every argument with a friend replay in your mind with crystal clarity years later. The sting of old rejections never fades, and painful memories return with the same intensity they had originally. Most of us forget things for good reason. Forgetting helps us heal, helps us move forward, helps us focus on what's happening now instead of being trapped in what already happened. For these individuals, though, the past doesn't fade into a comfortable blur. It stays sharp and present, crowding their mental space like an overstuffed closet. Scientists are still trying to figure out why some brains work this way. It might have to do with unusual patterns of reflection, or perhaps their memory networks are wired differently. Whatever the cause, it shows us just how varied human memory can be. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are people who can't see pictures in their minds at all. Ask someone with aphantasia to imagine a sunset, and they understand the concept perfectly, but there's no golden light painting the inside of their eyelids. Their mental experience lacks that internal movie screen that most of us take for granted. Yet these people remember their lives just fine. They recognize faces, learn new skills, and form lasting memories. Their brains just store information differently, perhaps more like a well-organized filing system than a photo album. They might remember a beach vacation through concepts and facts rather than visual snapshots. They know the sand was warm, the waves were loud, and they felt relaxed, but they don't replay it like a home movie. This tells us something profound about how flexible our minds really are. Memory isn't just one thing, it's more like a toolkit with different instruments. Your brain can be a library, a map, a collection of sounds, or yes, a cinema, depending on how it's built. The speed at which we form new memories is remarkable. In less than a second, a single glance can create a memory that lasts decades. Maybe it's a stranger's smile, maybe it's the sound of breaking glass, maybe it's just an unusual word that catches your attention. In that instant, millions of neurons coordinate their activity, synchronizing like musicians in an orchestra. Your brain is constantly sampling everything around you, but only certain moments get selected for long-term storage. Surprise is a big factor. Things that violate your expectations tend to stick. Emotional significance matters too, because feelings signal to your memory system that this moment might be important later. This rapid encoding probably evolved as a survival mechanism. If something dangerous or beneficial happened, you needed to remember it quickly. The interesting thing is, minutes after forming a new memory, you might feel like you've always known that information. The mind updates itself so smoothly that the seams barely show. When we look back at our experiences, we often remember the emotional flavor more clearly than the specific details. You might forget exactly what someone said to you, but you'll remember feeling hurt, or supported, or confused. These emotional fingerprints can influence your behavior for years afterward, shaping who you trust and what situations you avoid. This can lead to interesting complications though. Two people can experience the same event, but walk away with completely different emotional memories. Each person feels certain their version captures what really happened. Because emotions feel so true and immediate, our brains are designed to be efficient, not necessarily accurate. They save the meaning, the lesson, the feeling, rather than a perfect transcript. This is why nostalgia works the way it does. A particular place or song can flood you with warmth, even when the actual memories are vague. Your mind saved the emotional verdict, not necessarily the factual details. Perhaps most unsettling of all, your brain can manufacture memories that feel completely authentic. The same neural machinery that processes real experiences also handles imagination, dreams, and speculation. Sometimes these different processes get mixed up, and something you imagined or heard about gets filed away as something you actually lived. This isn't about being gullible or having a poor memory. It's about how memory works at the most basic level. When you hear a story repeatedly, you start forming vivid mental pictures of it. Eventually, those pictures feel familiar, and familiarity can be mistaken for personal experience. Your brain also fills in gaps automatically. You remember arriving at a party but not the first few minutes inside. Your mind supplies a plausible scene based on what usually happens at parties. And before long, that manufactured scene feels like a genuine memory. The vividness of a memory isn't a guarantee of its accuracy. That sense of clarity and detail is more like a graphics processor than a truth detector. It can render scenes that never happened with the same clarity as scenes that did. This reveals something both humbling and fascinating about consciousness itself. We like to think of our minds as reliable recording devices, but they're actually more like creative editors, constantly revising and interpreting our past to make sense of our present. The brain doesn't store memories like files in a cabinet, tucked away in neat little compartments. Instead, each memory spreads across multiple regions, like a symphony where different sections of an orchestra contribute their unique parts. Visual areas hold on to what your eyes captured. Auditory regions preserve the sounds that reached your ears. Emotional centers keep the feelings that colored the experience. When you remember something, all these scattered pieces coordinate together, creating the full picture. This distributed system explains some curious things about how memory works. Someone with brain damage might recognize a familiar voice perfectly, but struggle to place the face that goes with it. They could navigate a room from memory but forget every conversation that happened there. The brain's filing system isn't as organized as we might expect, and that creates both vulnerabilities and surprising strength. Strong memories often resurface from the most unexpected triggers, and a particular scent might transport you decades into the past, or a fragment of melody might unlock an entire forgotten afternoon. This happens because memories have multiple entry points scattered throughout the brain. You don't need the complete pattern to start remembering. One strong thread can pull the entire tapestry back into consciousness, piece by piece. Your mind actually operates several different memory systems simultaneously, each one evolved for specific tasks. One system specializes in personal episodes, those vivid moments where you can place yourself back in time and space. You remember not just what happened, but where you were standing, what the weather felt like, how the moment made you feel inside. This episodic memory lets you travel mentally through your own history. Another system handles general knowledge, the accumulated facts and concepts that have become detached from their original learning moments. You know that Paris is in France, but you probably can't remember the specific day you learned this fact. The knowledge has become timeless, floating free from its autobiographical context. Then there's procedural memory, which governs skills and habits. Your fingers know how to type without conscious direction. Your body remembers how to ride a bicycle, even after years away from one. These motor memories can remain remarkably strong, even when you can't articulate how they work. Ask someone to explain exactly how they tie their shoes, and they'll likely need to slow down and watch their own hands to give you an answer. These different memory systems don't always cooperate perfectly. You might know someone's name exists somewhere in your mind, but find yourself unable to retrieve it when you need it most. A skilled pianist might play beautifully during practice, but stumble under performance pressure when conscious attention interferes with automatic processes. This apparent conflict between systems reveals something profound about how the mind organizes itself. The variety isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. Having multiple pathways to store and retrieve information creates redundancy, backup routes when one system becomes overwhelmed or damaged. When stress clouds your explicit memory, muscle memory might still carry you through a familiar task. When emotional trauma blocks certain recollections, factual knowledge can remain accessible. The mind builds multiple bridges to the same destinations. Short-term memory operates on a much smaller scale than most people realize. That mental space where you hold information for immediate use can only juggle a few items at once before things start falling through the cracks. Tell someone a phone number and watch how quickly it vanishes if they don't use it right away. The brain treats this temporary workspace like a constantly erased whiteboard, clearing space for whatever needs attention next. What makes short-term memory feel more spacious than it actually is comes down to chunking. Individual digits become familiar patterns. Random letters group into meaningful acronyms. The mind constantly looks for ways to package information more efficiently, turning many small pieces into fewer larger ones. A string of numbers becomes a birthday, an area code, a significant date. Suddenly, what seemed impossible to remember fits comfortably in mental space. Interruption devastates this fragile system. You walk into a room with clear purpose, then encounter an unexpected conversation or compelling distraction. By the time you refocus, the original intention has evaporated completely. That mental notepad got overwritten before the information could solidify into something more permanent. Working memory serves as the mind's active workspace, the place where conscious thinking happens. It holds the beginning of a sentence while you plan the ending. It keeps track of intermediate steps while you solve problems in your head. It manages the multiple threads of complex reasoning, making sure nothing important gets dropped along the way. This system has limited capacity, and distractions exploit that limitation mercilessly. A single notification can hijack the entire workspace, causing carefully maintained thoughts to scatter like startled birds. The half-formed insight that seemed so promising moments before simply disappears, leaving behind only the frustrating sense that something important was lost. Working memory isn't just about storage capacity, it's about cognitive control. It decides what deserves attention and what gets pushed into the background. When this system becomes overloaded, even intelligent and well-rested people start feeling mentally clumsy. The world becomes harder to track, decisions become more difficult, and simple tasks require unexpectedly intense effort. Long-term memories don't remain frozen in their original form. They continue changing and evolving long after the initial experience ends. In the hours and days following learning, the brain keeps working on new information, gradually transforming it into something different from what was first encoded. Details may blur while central themes become clearer and more accessible. New skills often follow this pattern of transformation. What starts as effortful, conscious practice eventually becomes smooth and automatic. Even without constant repetition, the brain continues organizing and refining these abilities in the background. The awkward beginner movements gradually become fluid expertise through processes that happen largely outside awareness. This settling process helps the brain make knowledge truly useful. New information gets woven into existing networks of understanding, creating connections that enable quick decision-making in future situations. Sometimes memories become more general, distilling messy experiences into clear principles and lessons. Other times they become more interconnected, so that one idea can trigger related thoughts with minimal effort. The brain acts as a quiet organizer, constantly restructuring and optimizing stored information. This explains why understanding sometimes arrives unexpectedly, days after initial exposure to difficult material. Without any conscious effort to study or practice, concepts suddenly click into place. The mind has been working on the problem in the background, finding new ways to integrate unfamiliar ideas with familiar ones. Episodic memory provides perhaps the most remarkable capability of all: mental time travel into personal history. You can place yourself back into specific moments, re-experiencing them with surprising vividness and detail. Not just remembering that something happened, but feeling present in the original scene again, surrounded by the same sights, sounds, and emotions that colored the initial experience. Your brain builds memories in ways that go far beyond simple storage. When you experience something meaningful, your mind doesn't just file away facts. It captures the entire scene, complete with shadows, sounds, and the specific emotions you felt in that moment. This kind of memory, called episodic memory, works like a time machine that can transport you back to being there again. The fascinating thing is how closely this connects to imagination. Your brain uses the same mental tools to remember the past as it does to picture the future. When you're planning something, like a vacation or a conversation, you're essentially rehearsing episodes that haven't happened yet. It's as if your mind is constantly running simulations, testing out possibilities before they become real. This overlap between memory and imagination explains why certain triggers can flood you with vivid recollections. A particular song, or the way light falls across a table, can suddenly bring back an entire world from years ago. Your episodic memory isn't really a filing cabinet. It's more like a navigation system, helping you move through life by using your lived experiences as a kind of map. But there's another type of memory working alongside this one, quietly and efficiently. Semantic memory handles the vast collection of facts you carry around without any clear story of how you learnt them. You know that ice is cold, that dogs bark, that certain words mean certain things, yet you probably can't pinpoint the moment any of this knowledge entered your mind. This system strips away the personal context from information, which makes it incredibly powerful. A fact learned in childhood can serve you decades later, completely detached from its original setting. It's like having a library where all the books remain useful, even after you've forgotten how they got there. Sometimes this creates a peculiar frustration, though. You can sense that you know something, feel it sitting just out of reach, but can't quite grasp it. The knowledge exists somewhere in your mind, but the pathway to it seems temporarily blocked. Then later, Often when you've stopped trying, it surfaces effortlessly. There's something almost mysterious about this process, the way information can hide and reveal itself within the same brain. Then there's the memory that lives in your muscles and movements. Procedural memory operates below the level of words, storing skills as practiced patterns rather than describable knowledge. You can ride a bicycle, catch a ball, or play a familiar song without consciously directing each tiny movement. If you tried to explain every muscle action involved, you'd sound ridiculous, because this learning exists in the doing, not in the telling. This kind of memory can be surprisingly resilient. A musician might forget the words to a song, yet their fingers still find the right notes automatically. It's as if the body holds its own intelligence, separate from conscious thought. Early practice often feels clumsy precisely because your brain is still building these automatic routines. Repetition gradually tunes the timing and coordination until the pattern runs smoothly, freeing your conscious mind to focus on bigger goals. There's something profound about this quiet intelligence that lives in action, rather than explanation. It suggests that learning can happen in ways that bypass our usual understanding of how we know things. Your memory also works through more subtle influences that you might never notice. Priming shapes your thoughts and choices using traces of recent experiences. If you encounter a word, an image, or even a particular color, related ideas become temporarily easier to access. This can shift what you recognize, how you interpret situations, and what you decide to do next. You might walk past a coffee shop and suddenly want something warm to drink, even though you weren't thinking about beverages moments before. The sight has quietly activated networks in your brain, linked to past experiences of taste and comfort. It's not mind control, just your brain doing what it always does, using recent information to predict what might matter next. Most of the time, this helps you navigate the world more efficiently. It only becomes noticeable, and perhaps a little unsettling, when you catch it happening. Then you realize your mind is being influenced by echoes you didn't consciously register. Context plays a crucial role in what you can remember, and when. Memory retrieval often works best when the current situation matches the one where the memory formed. A particular scent, the lighting in a room, or even background noise can make recall flow more smoothly. This is why you might struggle to remember something at your desk, then have it pop back as soon as you step outside. Your brain stores information alongside its surroundings, because those surroundings help locate the right mental file. Students sometimes discover this when they study in one location, but take tests in another. The knowledge is there, but the environmental cues have changed, making access more difficult. Internal context matters too. Your emotional state, energy level, and general mood when learning something can influence how easily you retrieve it later. This doesn't mean memory is unreliable, rather that it's organized in sophisticated ways. Your brain uses context like a complex labeling system. Change the labels and searching takes longer. Restore them and retrieval becomes almost effortless. There's something beautiful about realizing that your memories aren't separate from the world around you. They're woven into the fabric of places, feelings, and circumstances, creating connections that span across time in ways you might never fully understand. Memory operates like an intricate web, where pulling on one thread can illuminate an entire tapestry. The brain doesn't file away experiences like documents in a cabinet. Instead, it weaves them into interconnected patterns, creating a living network of associations. When you encounter a familiar scent, your coffee mug, or hear an old song, something remarkable happens. These simple triggers act as gateways, opening doors to complete scenes from your past. The brain has linked that one sensory detail to everything else that was happening at the same moment. This is why a photograph can transport you back not just to what you saw, but to what you felt, heard, and even what the air smelled like. These connections form without your conscious effort. Your brain constantly builds bridges between simultaneous experiences, creating what scientists call associative networks. A particular voice becomes linked to a specific room. The texture of a sweater gets connected to a winter afternoon. The taste of strawberries binds itself to childhood summers. This linking process serves a deeper purpose than simple nostalgia. It helps you navigate the present moment by drawing on relevant past experiences. When you enter a new restaurant, your brain quickly scans for familiar patterns. The lighting, the sounds, the arrangement of tables all trigger memories that help you understand how to behave, what to expect, and how to feel comfortable. The hippocampus, a curved structure deep in your brain, acts as the chief architect of these memory episodes. Think of your daily experience as thousands of separate fragments: conversations, faces, colors, temperatures, emotions, all competing for attention. Without the hippocampus, these pieces would remain scattered and disconnected. This brain region specializes in binding separate elements into coherent stories. It takes the laugh you heard, the person who made it, the room you were in, the conversation that preceded it, and weaves them together into a single, retrievable episode. This binding process transforms random sensory input into meaningful memories that feel like complete scenes from your life. When the hippocampus functions properly, you don't just remember facts. You can mentally step back into previous moments. You can recall not only what happened, but your perspective. At the time, the binding includes your younger self's thoughts, hopes, and understanding, creating a bridge between who you were then and who you are now. Place holds particular power in this memory system. The brain's spatial mapping abilities create strong associations between locations and events. A street corner becomes more than a geographical point. It transforms into a bookmark, marking specific chapters of your personal history. This is why returning to childhood neighborhoods can feel so emotionally intense. The physical space triggers not just visual memories, but entire emotional landscapes from different periods of your life. Your brain has encoded the location as part of the memory itself. The amygdala processes emotional significance, adding intensity markers to certain experiences. This small, almond-shaped structure acts like a spotlight operator in the theater of memory. When something important happens, especially something that might relate to your safety or survival, the amygdala increases the memory's priority. Fear-inducing situations receive particularly strong emotional tags. A near accident, a sudden loud noise, or a moment of genuine danger gets marked for permanent storage. This isn't about creating drama. It's an ancient survival mechanism designed to help you recognize and avoid similar threats. In the future, these emotional markers can make certain details feel unnaturally vivid. The sound of brakes, the color of a car, the expression on someone's face, all become enhanced and preserved with unusual clarity. Later, even small reminders can trigger the entire emotional response, sometimes before you consciously remember what happened. Positive emotions work similarly. Moments of joy, safety, love, or triumph also receive enhanced storage. This is why comfort objects, childhood homes, or favorite songs can instantly transport you back to feelings of security and happiness. However, emotional intensity doesn't guarantee accuracy. The amygdala's job is marking importance, not ensuring factual precision. Highly emotional memories can feel incredibly real, while containing significant distortions. The brain prioritizes the emotional truth of an experience over its literal details. The prefrontal cortex manages conscious memory formation in real time. While you read, listen, or observe, this brain region constantly makes decisions about what deserves long-term storage. It acts like a museum curator, selecting which experiences merit permanent exhibition space. This selection process requires mental resources. When you're tired, stressed, or distracted, the prefrontal cortex has less energy for effective curation. Information may enter your awareness but fail to transfer into lasting memory. This explains why studying while exhausted or trying to remember names at overwhelming social events often proves frustrating. Understanding this process reveals why certain strategies work. When you rephrase information, ask questions, or create personal connections, you give the prefrontal cortex clear reasons to prioritize that material. You're essentially communicating with your own memory system, explaining why something matters enough to remember. The cerebellum refines physical skills through a process of constant calibration. This brain region specializes in motor learning, tracking the tiny errors that occur during physical practice. When you learn to ride a bicycle, play an instrument, or master a sport, the cerebellum compares intended movements with actual results. Each mistake provides valuable information. A tennis ball that flies too high tells the cerebellum to reduce the racket angle. A piano note that sounds flat indicates the finger struck with insufficient force. These corrections happen below the level of consciousness, gradually improving performance through systematic adjustment. Motor memories feel different from other types of remembering. You can't easily describe in words how to balance on a bicycle or explain precisely how your fingers find the right keys. When typing, these skills become embedded in your body's automatic responses rather than in verbal knowledge. This explains why physical skills often persist, even when other memories fade. The cerebellum's learning system creates robust, long-lasting changes that can survive years of disuse. Someone who learned to swim as a child can often return to the water decades later and rediscover the coordination their body once mastered. At the cellular level, memory formation involves physical changes in brain tissue. Neurons communicate through specialized junctions called synapses. When you learn something new, these connections can become stronger, more efficient, or more sensitive to future signals. Initially, pushing through unfamiliar territory requires significant effort, but repeated use creates clearer paths. The vegetation gets trampled down, obstacles are removed, and the route becomes increasingly easy to navigate. Similarly, when you practice a new skill or repeatedly recall a memory, the associated neural pathways become more readily accessible. The physical structure of your brain literally changes to accommodate new learning. Proteins are synthesized, receptor molecules are adjusted, and synaptic connections are strengthened. This plasticity explains both memory formation and memory loss. Pathways that aren't regularly used gradually weaken. Competing neural networks can override old connections. Your brain constantly balances preservation of important information with the flexibility to learn new things. The process reveals a profound truth about human experience. Your memories aren't stored like files on a computer. They exist as tendencies for certain patterns of brain activity to recur. Each time you remember something, you're not accessing a recording. You're recreating a neural event based on the current state of your synaptic connections. This means memory is always slightly creative. Each recall can subtly alter the original pattern, incorporating new context, current emotions, and updated understanding. You're not just remembering the past, you're continuously rewriting it through the lens of who you've become. The human brain operates like a master gardener, constantly deciding which neural pathways deserve to flourish and which should be cleared away. Fresh connections sprout whenever you encounter something new, while older, less useful links get quietly trimmed back. This isn't your brain failing you. It's actually performing essential maintenance work that keeps your mental circuits running smoothly. Think about when you first learned to drive a car. Your mind juggled dozens of different approaches. Every tiny movement felt overwhelming and chaotic. Gradually, though, the most efficient pathways won out, while the clumsy, unnecessary ones simply faded into the background. What started as mental noise became elegant, automatic skill. Children's developing brains work this way too, but on a much grander scale. Young minds begin with an almost overwhelming abundance of neural connections, far more than any adult brain contains. As kids grow up in their specific environment, their brains carefully select which pathways match their actual lived reality. The unused connections don't stick around taking up space. They get pruned away like excess branches on a tree. This sculpting process creates something remarkable. What remains isn't just smaller, it's faster, sharper, and perfectly tuned to navigate real-world challenges. Your brain becomes a customized instrument, shaped by your unique experiences and needs. But here's where things get really interesting. Not all information gets treated equally by this biological sculptor. Facts that feel meaningless to you can slip away almost immediately, like water through a sieve. Information that connects to your personal life, your relationships, your goals, that gets woven into your neural networks with surprising strength. Consider how quickly you learn medical terminology when someone you love falls ill. Suddenly, complex words that would normally bounce right off your consciousness stick like glue. Or think about navigating a new neighborhood when you're alone in an unfamiliar city. Every street name, every landmark becomes part of your personal survival map. Your brain isn't just filing away random data, it's constantly evaluating relevance. Information that matters to your identity, your safety, your relationships gets premium storage space. Everything else competes for whatever room remains. Stories tap into this relevance system beautifully. They don't just deliver facts, they wrap those facts in purpose, sequence, and emotional weight. Characters face challenges, make decisions, experience consequences. Your brain recognizes these patterns as important because stories mirror the structure of lived experience. Once you discover that personal hook, that connection between new information and something you already care about, learning transforms completely. What felt like drudgery becomes exploration. Practice stops feeling like work and starts feeling like progress towards something meaningful. Your attention sharpens because your brain expects to use this knowledge again soon, but attention itself deserves deeper consideration. It acts as the ultimate gatekeeper, deciding what information even gets a chance to become memory. You can stare directly at something and completely miss it if your mental spotlight points elsewhere. The world bombards you with millions of sensory details every moment, far more than any brain could possibly process. When your attention finally lands on something specific, remarkable things happen. Colors seem more vivid, sounds become clearer, time appears to slow down slightly. That focused moment has a much better chance of becoming a retrievable memory later. This reveals something profound about how memory actually works. It's not just about preserving the past, it's about enriching the present. Slowing down might be the simplest yet most powerful learning tool available to you. When you rush past experiences, you're essentially closing the door before information can enter. But when you pause, look again, listen as though details actually matter, that doorway swings wide open. Curiosity acts like a master key for this entire system. It's not just a pleasant feeling, it's a distinct mental state that fundamentally changes how your brain processes incoming information. When you genuinely want to understand something, your attention becomes steadier, more patient with complexity and ambiguity. Curious minds notice subtleties that distracted minds miss completely. They tolerate not knowing the answer long enough for real understanding to develop. Uncertainty stops feeling uncomfortable and starts feeling like possibility. This matters enormously because genuine learning always happens in that space between knowing and not knowing. Questions transform the entire experience of acquiring knowledge. Instead of information feeling like a burden imposed from outside, it becomes treasure you're actively seeking. Why does this word carry this particular meaning? How does that magic trick fool your perception? What invisible processes transform a tiny seed into a towering plant? When curiosity prepares your mind this way, answers don't just bounce off the surface of your consciousness, they sink in, connect with existing knowledge, become part of your understanding. The best teachers understand this sequence perfectly. They create questions before offering explanations, opening mental space before trying to fill it. Your brain rewards curiosity with genuine pleasure, the same satisfaction you might feel solving a puzzle or discovering a shortcut home. Learning stops being something you have to do and becomes something you get to do. Fear has this peculiar way of carving itself into memory with remarkable precision. When your brain detects danger, it shifts into a recording mode that captures details with unusual clarity. The neural pathways responsible for fear learning work faster than most other memory systems. A single frightening experience can create a memory that lasts for years, sometimes decades. This happens because fear serves such a fundamental purpose, keeping you alive by helping you avoid similar threats in the future. What makes fear memories so persistent is how they bypass the usual filtering process. Most experiences get sorted and edited before storage, but fear memories often go straight through. The amygdala, that almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, acts like an emergency broadcaster. It sends signals that essentially tell other brain regions, "This matters, record everything." The result is memories that feel incredibly vivid, almost like they happened yesterday, even when years have passed. Dopamine operates as more than just a pleasure chemical, though that is how most people think about it. Its real job involves teaching your brain what deserves attention. When something unexpected happens, when you achieve a goal, or when you encounter something meaningful, dopamine creates what scientists call a prediction error signal. This signal essentially marks the moment as worth remembering. It is like your brain putting a sticky note on an experience that says, "Pay attention to this pattern." This chemical messenger also drives motivation in ways that connect directly to memory formation. When dopamine levels are optimal, you feel drawn to engage with challenging material. That engagement creates stronger memory traces because your brain is actively processing rather than passively receiving. People with conditions that affect dopamine systems often report that learning feels more difficult, not because their memory storage is broken, but because the motivation to engage deeply gets disrupted. The brain constantly ranks experiences, deciding which ones deserve permanent storage and which ones can fade away. This ranking system explains why some random moments stick with you forever, while important information sometimes slips away. The ranking is not based on logical importance, but on biological signals. A conversation with a stranger might become unforgettable if it happened during an emotionally charged moment, while a crucial meeting might blur together with dozens of similar meetings. Novelty acts like a wake-up call for your memory systems. When you encounter something new, your brain shifts into a more attentive mode because new things represent potential opportunities or threats. This heightened attention creates richer encoding, which means the memory gets stored with more detail and stronger connections. First experiences often feel more vivid than repeated ones because your brain is working harder to process unfamiliar information. This novelty effect helps explain why childhood memories often feel so intense. Everything was new then, so your brain was constantly in that heightened recording mode. The same principle applies throughout life. When you travel to new places, start new jobs, or learn new skills, the unfamiliarity triggers enhanced memory formation. Even small changes in routine can activate this system, which is why varying your study environment or learning methods often improves retention. Strong emotions work like a zoom lens on memory, sharpening some details while blurring others. When you experience intense fear, joy, anger, or surprise, Your brain focuses on what seems most relevant to that emotional state. You might remember someone's exact facial expression during an argument, but completely forget what music was playing in the background. This selective enhancement happens because emotional memories prioritize survival, relevant information over peripheral details. This emotional focusing creates an interesting psychological phenomenon. The central details feel so vivid and clear that people often assume their memory of the entire event must be accurate. But research shows that emotional memories are actually quite selective and sometimes unreliable around the edges. Two people can have completely different recollections of the same emotional event, yet both feel absolutely certain their version is correct. Owl represents a unique emotional state that seems specially designed to create lasting memories. When you experience something that feels vast, beautiful, or beyond your normal frame of reference, your mind shifts into a different processing mode. Time seems to slow down, your attention expands, and ordinary concerns fade into the background. This mental state often produces memories that feel unusually rich and meaningful. The time distortion that accompanies awe happens because your brain is processing more information per unit of time. It is like increasing the frame rate on a camera. You notice more details, more subtle changes, more connections between elements in your environment. This enhanced processing creates memories that feel longer and more complete than they actually were in real time. Many people can recall awe-inspiring moments with remarkable clarity, even decades later. Travel memories often carry this quality because new places naturally trigger both novelty responses and awe experiences. Standing in an ancient cathedral, watching a sunset over an unfamiliar landscape, or hearing a language you do not understand all activate memory systems in ways that routine experiences rarely do. The combination of newness, emotional intensity, and expanded attention creates ideal conditions for memory formation. Memory formation is not just about recording information, it is about creating a personal narrative that helps you navigate future situations. Each stored experience becomes part of a vast library that your brain consults when making decisions, forming opinions, and predicting outcomes. The memories that stick are not necessarily the most accurate ones, but the ones that felt most significant to your survival, growth, or understanding of the world. When something frightens us, the brain learns with remarkable speed. One scary moment can create a memory that lasts for years. This happens because, from an evolutionary standpoint, hesitation in dangerous situations could mean the difference between life and death. Our ancestors who learned quickly from threats were more likely to survive. The brain takes everything from that frightening moment, the sounds, the smells, the visual details, and weaves them together into a protective memory. Next time you encounter similar cues, your body will react before you even have time to think. This lightning-fast learning system served our species well when we faced predators and natural disasters. But here's where things get complicated. Sometimes the brain learns too much from one bad experience. You might develop a fear of all dogs after one aggressive encounter, or feel anxious in any crowded space after a panic attack in a particular room. The brain, in its effort to keep you safe, can paint with too broad a brush. This overprotective tendency makes sense when you consider that false alarms are often less costly than missed dangers. It's better to be cautious around 10 harmless situations than to miss one truly dangerous one. Yet this same mechanism can trap us in patterns that no longer serve us. The good news is that fear memories, despite their stubborn nature, can be gently reshaped. Through safe, repeated exposure to the things that frighten us, the brain can learn new associations. It's like teaching an old story a new ending. This process requires patience, though, because survival memories resist change by design. Laughter does something fascinating to our ability to remember things. When we laugh, our entire physiology shifts. Stress hormones drop, muscles relax, breathing deepens. This internal calm creates ideal conditions for learning. Because the brain isn't spending energy on threat detection, there's something almost magical about how humor makes information stick. A funny moment stands out in our memory like a bright landmark. Think about your favorite teachers, the ones you remember decades later. Chances are they made you laugh. That laughter didn't just make learning enjoyable, it made learning possible. When people laugh together, something remarkable happens. Everyone in the room focuses on the same moment, creating what researchers call synchronized attention. The brain loves this kind of shared focus. It signals that something important is happening, something worth remembering. This isn't about being constantly cheerful or avoiding serious topics. Rather, it's about understanding that playfulness can be a powerful learning tool. When we feel safe enough to laugh, we give our brains permission to explore and store new information. Music has an almost supernatural ability to preserve memories. Songs from decades ago can transport us instantly back to specific moments, complete with emotions and sensory details. This happens because music is structured in a way that perfectly matches how our brains like to organize information. Rhythm provides a timing framework, melody creates a predictable path, and repetition reinforces the pattern without feeling like tedious drill work. That's why you can probably sing along to songs you haven't heard in years. The musical structure carries the words even when you can't recall them through conscious effort. Musical connects directly to our emotional centers, making the memories it carries more vivid and lasting. A song from a significant time in your life doesn't just remind you of events, it can actually recreate the feelings you experienced then. The excitement, the heartbreak, the hope, all preserved in melody and rhythm. This is why music therapy can reach people when other approaches fail. Even when disease or injury damages many pathways to memory, the musical route often remains open. A familiar tune can act like a master key, unlocking memories that seemed lost forever. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures, and our memories reflect this deep need for connection. When we feel genuinely connected to others, our attention becomes more focused and our emotions more balanced. This creates optimal conditions for forming strong, lasting memories. Shared experiences get rehearsed naturally through conversation. Friends retell stories to each other, and each retelling polishes the memory, making it clearer and more accessible. There's also a collaborative effect, where one person remembers certain details while another recalls different aspects, creating a more complete picture together. Even watching other people's reactions becomes part of what we remember. When you see someone laugh, cry or gasp with surprise, your brain stores not just the event itself, but its social meaning. This is why communal experiences, celebrations, ceremonies, even shared struggles, can become some of our most vivid memories. Connection tells the brain that a moment matters beyond our individual experience. It ties the memory to our sense of identity and belonging, giving it extra weight and permanence. There's something profound about how meaning multiplies when it's shared with others. Loneliness, unfortunately, can have the opposite effect on memory. When we feel isolated, the brain often shifts into a more vigilant, guarded state. This hypervigilance can steal the relaxed attention that memory formation requires. It's like trying to take a photograph while the camera keeps scanning for threats. Without regular social interaction, we also lose the natural rehearsal that keeps memories fresh and accessible. Stories don't get retold, details don't get refreshed through conversation. Days can start to blur together because fewer moments feel socially significant enough to stand out. This can create a difficult cycle where foggy memory makes social connection feel even harder, leading to further withdrawal. But the encouraging truth is that even small, consistent social contact can begin to reverse this pattern. Memory isn't just a private ability we possess individually, it's something we create and maintain together. In many ways, we remember ourselves through other people, and they help us remember who we are. Memory works a lot like a storyteller who's constantly editing their tale. Your brain doesn't just store what happened, it actively shapes those memories to match the story you tell yourself about who you are. When life gets messy and confusing, your mind steps in to clean things up, making everything feel more organized than it really was. Think about how you remember your own luck, or lack of it. If you see yourself as someone who always gets the short end of the stick, your brain becomes really good at highlighting all those moments when things went wrong. Meanwhile, those quiet victories, those times when everything worked out just fine, they start to fade into the background. It's not that they didn't happen, it's just that they don't fit the narrative your mind has decided to tell. This editing process runs on something called schemas, which are basically your brain's templates for how the world usually works. They're incredibly useful because they help you navigate life quickly without having to analyze every single detail from scratch. But here's the thing, they also act like invisible filters, reshaping your memories so they match what you expect to remember. When the details don't quite fit the template, your brain does something fascinating. It smooths out the rough edges. It fills in gaps, adjusts the colors, and makes everything feel consistent. Later on, this edited version doesn't feel edited at all. It feels like the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This is why two people who grew up in the same house can have completely different versions of their childhood. They're not just remembering different events, they're remembering different meanings, different interpretations of what those events said, about their family, about themselves, about how the world works. Each person's memory becomes a mirror of their current understanding, not necessarily a window into the past. Here's something that might surprise you. Confidence in a memory has almost nothing to do with whether that memory is accurate. You can have a memory that feels crystal clear, bright, and vivid, filled with specific details, and still be completely wrong about the key parts. Confidence is more like a feeling than a measurement tool. One of the biggest influences on confidence is something called fluency, which is basically how easily information comes to your mind. If you've told a story many times, it becomes smooth, polished, effortless to recall, and that smoothness tricks your brain into thinking it must be true. After all, if it comes so easily, if it flows so naturally, how could it be wrong? Emotion plays a similar role. Memories tied to strong feelings, anger, pride, joy, fear, they feel more powerful, more real. Your brain mistakes that emotional intensity for accuracy, as if the strength of the feeling somehow guarantees the truth of the memory. It's like confusing the volume of a radio with the quality of the signal. Social feedback adds another layer to this complexity. When you tell a story and people nod along, when they seem engaged and believing, your own confidence in that story grows. Even if the story has drifted quite a bit from what actually happened, their acceptance makes you more certain. This is part of why eyewitness testimony, even from confident, well-meaning people, can be so unreliable. The human mind treats confidence more like a volume knob than a truth meter. You can turn it up or down based on all sorts of factors that have nothing to do with accuracy. Understanding this doesn't mean you should distrust all your memories, but it does suggest treating them with a certain curiosity, a gentle skepticism, even about your own experiences. Memory turns out to be surprisingly vulnerable to suggestion, especially right after an event happens. Your brain doesn't immediately lock in what occurred. Instead, it spends time assembling the experience, putting together the pieces, trying to make sense of what happened. During this assembly period, outside influences can slip in almost unnoticed. A simple question can change everything. If someone asks whether you saw a knife, your mind starts searching for knife-shaped details, even if there was no knife involved. That question becomes part of the search process, and later, it can become part of the memory itself. You might end up remembering seeing something that was never there, not because you're lying or confused, but because your brain was trying to be helpful, trying to answer the question. Authority makes this effect much stronger. A confident interviewer, a news headline, a friend who speaks with absolute certainty, they can all quietly steer your memory in new directions. The more times you hear a suggestion, the more familiar it becomes. And familiarity has a way of transforming into belief, almost without you noticing. This is why careful questioning is so important in legal investigations. The goal isn't just to extract information, it's to avoid accidentally planting new information. Every interaction with a witness is potentially rewriting their memory, adding new details, shifting emphasis, changing the story in subtle but significant ways. Your memory isn't like a video recording that you can play back exactly as it happened. It's more like a collection of snapshots with lots of missing frames. When you try to remember something, your brain looks at those snapshots and then uses logic, habits, and probability to fill in the blanks. If you remember walking into a coffee shop, your mind might automatically add details about ordering at the counter, even if you actually found a table first. These additions feel completely natural because they're based on your real knowledge of how coffee shops usually work, how these situations typically unfold. Over time, these filled-in details become indistinguishable from the original memories. You stop being able to tell which parts you actually experienced and which parts your brain helpfully provided. This process has a name: confabulation, and while it can become extreme in certain medical conditions, the everyday version happens to everyone. The mind would rather give you a complete story than admit there are gaps in the record. It's constantly trying to make sense of things, to create coherence, to deliver a narrative that feels whole and satisfying. In many ways, this is wonderful. It helps you function in a complex world. But it also means your memories are always partly constructed, always a collaboration between what happened and what your brain thinks should have happened. Misinformation can slip into memory so smoothly that it feels like it was always there. After major events, people naturally seek explanations, context, additional details. Information spreads quickly, not all of it accurate. A rumor, a misleading caption, someone's confident but wrong retelling, these can all become part of your own memory of what occurred. Once a detail gets attached to your memory, it can feel completely original. You might remember hearing a specific phrase in a speech when you actually read it later, in someone's commentary. You might remember seeing smoke in a photograph when the smoke was added by your imagination after hearing other people describe it. The problem isn't just external lies or deliberate deception. It's the way memory naturally updates itself. Your brain treats new information as a potential correction to what it already has stored. Then it merges everything together, old and new, original and added, creating a seamless experience that feels entirely authentic. Social media can accelerate this process dramatically because repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates a sense of truth. When you see the same claim multiple times, from different sources, your brain starts to treat it as established fact, regardless of whether it actually is. All of this raises some interesting questions about the nature of truth, about the reliability of experience, about how we know what we know. If our memories are constantly being edited and updated, if our confidence is based more on feeling than accuracy, what does that mean for our understanding of ourselves and our past? Perhaps the goal isn't perfect recall, but rather a kind of humble curiosity about our own minds, an appreciation for both the power and the limitations of human memory. Memory operates like a delicate ecosystem, constantly reshaping itself based on the inputs we feed it. The brain doesn't simply store experiences like files in a cabinet. It reconstructs them each time we recall, blending fact with interpretation, emotion with observation. Consider how a single photograph can fundamentally alter your recollection of an entire day. That image captures just one fraction of a second, frozen in time with a particular angle, specific lighting, and chosen composition. Yet when you glance at it months later, this static frame begins to dominate your mental reconstruction of that experience. The laughter that happened 5 minutes before the photo, the argument that occurred right after, the smell of rain in the air, all these elements start to fade as the photograph becomes the anchor point for your memory. This process happens so subtly that most people never notice it occurring. The brain naturally gravitates toward concrete visual information, especially when other details begin to blur. A family gathering becomes defined by the posed group shot, rather than the complex mix of conversations, tensions, and genuine moments that actually filled those hours. The photo suggests everyone was happy, so your memory adjusts to match that narrative. What makes this particularly fascinating is how photos can actually implant emotions that weren't present during the original event. A forced smile captured at the right moment can convince your future self that you were genuinely enjoying something you actually found tedious. The brain treats that visual evidence as more reliable than its own authentic emotional record from the time. Professional photographers understand this power instinctively. They know that the images they create, don't just document reality, they help construct future memories. Wedding photographers, for instance, aren't just recording a ceremony, they're helping to build the couple's long-term recollection of one of their most important days. But photographs represent just one way that external influences can reshape our internal experiences. Repetition itself acts as another powerful memory modifier, even when we're not consciously trying to learn anything. The human brain has evolved to treat familiar information as more trustworthy than unfamiliar information, regardless of accuracy. This tendency shows up everywhere in daily life. Advertising executives have known for decades that people will gradually warm up to slogans they initially found annoying, simply through repeated exposure. Political strategists rely on the same principle, understanding that a claim doesn't need to be particularly convincing on first hearing if it can be repeated often enough across different contexts. The mechanism behind this phenomenon operates below conscious awareness most of the time. When your brain encounters information for the second, third, or fourth time, it processes that information more smoothly than it did initially. This cognitive ease feels pleasant, and the brain interprets that pleasant feeling as a signal that the information must be reliable and accurate. Scientists call this the illusory truth effect, and it demonstrates just how much our sense of truth depends on mental comfort rather than logical evaluation. Something can feel true simply because it feels familiar, even when we have no actual evidence supporting it. This creates obvious vulnerabilities in how we navigate information-rich environments. Yet the same mechanism that makes us susceptible to misinformation also helps us function efficiently in the world. Recognizing familiar faces, navigating known routes, and building social connections all benefit from our brain's tendency to trust repeated patterns. The challenge lies in learning when to override this automatic response. Perhaps even more intriguing than how external factors shape memory is how internal factors create completely different versions of the same shared experience. Two people can participate in identical events, yet walk away with genuinely contradictory recollections, both absolutely convinced of their accuracy. This happens because memory formation is not a passive recording process. Instead, each brain actively filters incoming information based on what seems most relevant to that particular person's goals, concerns, and emotional state in that moment. During a heated discussion, one participant might focus intensely on voice tone and body language, treating those as the primary indicators of the conversation's meaning. Meanwhile, the other person might concentrate on the specific words being used, barely registering the nonverbal communication. Physical positioning during events also influences what gets encoded into long-term memory. Someone standing near a window might notice and remember environmental details that completely escape someone facing the opposite direction. The person by the door might recall interruptions that others missed entirely. These aren't ladders of better or worse attention. They're natural consequences of how human perception works within physical space. Then time begins its own editorial process on these already subjective recordings. Each time we recall an experience, we don't simply retrieve a static file. We reconstruct the memory using whatever details feel most significant in our current context. This reconstruction process inevitably emphasizes certain elements, while allowing others to fade, gradually shifting the memory's emotional tone and factual content. After several years, two people's memories of the same conversation can become so different that they might as well be describing completely separate interactions. Yet both versions can contain authentic emotional truth, even when they contradict each other factually. One person's memory of feeling dismissed might coexist perfectly with another person's memory of feeling attacked, both during the same brief exchange. This raises profound questions about the nature of truth itself when it comes to human experience. If memory is the foundation of personal identity, and memory is inherently subjective and malleable, then what does that suggest about the stories we tell ourselves about our own lives? Perhaps the question isn't whether our memories are accurate, but whether they serve us well as we continue moving forward. Memory doesn't work like most people think it does. Your brain isn't recording everything that happens to you, like some kind of biological video camera. Instead, it's constantly making choices about what to keep, what to throw away, and what to change. The human brain evolved to help you survive, not to create perfect records of your experiences. When something happens to you, your mind immediately starts compressing that experience. It pulls out the important parts, the lessons you can use later, the patterns that might matter. This is why you can remember the main message of a conversation, but you probably can't quote it word for word. Think about walking through a new neighborhood. You might come away with a strong sense that the area felt dangerous or welcoming, but if someone asked you to describe every single building you saw, you'd probably struggle. Your brain grabbed the overall feeling, the general impression, because that's what will actually help you make decisions later. This system of meaning over detail serves us remarkably well. It's how we learn to recognize kindness in a stranger's face, even though we've never seen that exact expression before. It's why you know that fire burns, whether it's coming from a candle, a stove, or a campfire. Your memory extracts the essential truth and makes it portable, but this preference for meaning creates some interesting side effects. Details can get mixed up, especially when experiences are similar to each other. You might remember having a conversation with someone, but not be quite sure if it happened last week or last month. The important part, what was actually said, stays clear, while the specific circumstances get fuzzy. There's something almost philosophical about this trade-off. We sacrifice perfect accuracy for wisdom. We give up the ability to replay our lives exactly as they happened, in exchange for the ability to learn and grow from our experiences. Every time you tell a story about something that happened to you, that memory changes a little bit. This isn't because you're lying or trying to deceive anyone. It's just how human memory works. Each retelling is like a performance, and performances naturally drift over time. Maybe you're telling a friend about something funny that happened at work. You emphasize the humorous parts because you want them to laugh. The next time you tell that story, the funny elements feel even more central to what happened. You might simplify the timeline to make the story flow better. Pretty soon, that simplified version becomes what you actually remember. Sometimes you'll borrow a phrase that someone else used because it captures exactly what you want to say. After a while, those borrowed words start to feel like your own. This isn't dishonesty, it's just how our brains optimize stories for sharing with other people. Over the years, a memory can transform from being about what actually happened into being about what that story means in your life. This can be beautiful, because stories help us understand who we are and connect with other people. But it can also create false confidence, because a well-polished story feels so solid and real. If you want to preserve a memory closer to its original form, try varying how you think about it. Write it down sometime, just for yourself, without worrying about how it sounds. Pay attention to what details you're tempted to change or leave out. Those edits tell you something about what matters to you right now. Some memories feel incredibly vivid, like they were burned into your mind with perfect clarity. These often happen during moments of shock or sudden change. You can picture exactly where you were standing, who spoke first, even small details like the quality of light in the room. The vividness is so strong that it feels impossible these memories could be wrong. But research shows that even these crystal clear memories drift over time. People remain completely confident in their recollections, even as the details quietly shift. What tends to stay stable is the emotional core of the experience. What changes are the surrounding facts, the specific circumstances. Your brain protects that feeling of "I will never forget this," because that feeling serves a purpose. It helps you learn from important experiences. It also makes the story easier to share with others, and sharing the story, telling it over and over, makes it feel even more certain and real. The result is a memory that feels like it's carved in stone, even while it's still being shaped. Vividness creates the illusion of accuracy, but it's not a guarantee. Traumatic experiences can break memory apart in unusual ways. When your brain detects extreme danger, it shifts into emergency mode. Survival becomes more important than creating a coherent narrative of what's happening. Later, instead of remembering the traumatic event as a complete story, It might come back in fragments. A particular smell might suddenly trigger intense emotions. A certain tone of voice could cause a physical reaction that seems out of proportion to the situation. Some people remember sharp, clear images from traumatic experiences, but struggle to put those images in the right order or connect them into a meaningful sequence. This fragmentation can feel disturbing, like something important is missing or broken, but it's actually the signature of a brain that was overwhelmed and running on pure survival instinct. The body often stores the alarm signals from traumatic experiences, even when the conscious mind can't construct a complete narrative. This is why certain places, sounds or situations can trigger intense reactions that seem to come from nowhere. The trigger isn't creating new fear, it's activating an old warning system that never got properly integrated into a calm, organized memory. Understanding how memory actually works changes how we think about our own experiences. We're not broken recorders that sometimes malfunction. We're meaning-making creatures, constantly weaving the raw material of experience into something useful, something that helps us navigate an uncertain world. The brain stores what we know in ways that don't always match what we expect. When someone can't create mental pictures, their memories shift from being like vivid movies to something more like historical records. This happens with a condition where the mind's eye simply doesn't work the way most people assume it should. Without that internal visual replay, remembering becomes a different kind of experience entirely. The person might know exactly what happened at dinner last week, every detail of the conversation, every emotion they felt, but they can't see the restaurant in their mind. They can't picture the waiter's face or visualize the color of the walls. The knowledge stays perfectly intact, but the sensory richness that usually comes with remembering just isn't there. This creates an interesting split between knowing something and feeling like you're reliving it. Most of us take for granted that remembering means we can almost step back into past moments, seeing them unfold again behind our closed eyelids. But consciousness, it turns out, has different styles. Some people navigate their memories more like reading a detailed report than watching home videos. Nostalgia works differently when you can't conjure up mental images. You might deeply miss someone from your past while being unable to picture their smile. The emotional connection remains strong, but it exists without the visual component that usually accompanies those feelings. Dreams can vary too. Some people with this condition report seeing things in their sleep. Others don't, showing just how individually our brains handle imagery. This whole phenomenon reveals something profound about the separation between understanding and visualization. You can remember without pictures, plan without mental scenes, make decisions without running visual simulations in your head. The facts of your life don't actually need a mental slideshow to exist and be meaningful. On the completely opposite end of the spectrum, some brains create extra connections between different senses that most people don't experience. Musical notes might trigger specific colors, letters of the alphabet might each have their own distinct shade or texture, numbers could have personalities or occupy particular positions in imaginary space. These cross-wired sensory experiences happen automatically and consistently. If the letter A always appears red to someone, it will always appear red, creating a kind of built-in filing system that most brains don't have access to. Days of the week might each have their own color, making calendars and schedules easier to organize mentally. This sensory blending can become a powerful tool for memory. When information gets tagged with multiple sensory labels, like giving a computer file both a name and a color code, it becomes easier to retrieve later. If a word always feels blue, you'll notice immediately when something seems off about it. These extra hooks for recall don't automatically make someone smarter, but they do provide additional pathways to the same information. Scientists think this happens because certain brain regions that usually keep sensory information separate end up with unusual connections between them. It's a striking example of how tightly perception and memory can be woven together, creating experiences that most of us can barely imagine. Recognition itself turns out to be far more complex than it seems. Some people can look directly at a close friend's face and not feel any spark of familiarity, even though they can see every feature perfectly clearly. Instead, they become experts at using other clues for identification. A person's voice becomes crucial, their particular way of walking, their hairstyle, the clothes they typically wear, even the context where you encounter them. Someone might recognize you instantly the moment you say hello, but feel completely uncertain if you just wave silently from across a room. This reveals that recognition isn't actually one unified ability. It's a collection of parallel systems working together, and faces represent their own specialized domain. Most of us experience face recognition as effortless, which completely hides how incredibly complex the process actually is. When this system doesn't work normally, either from birth or after brain injury, the complexity becomes obvious. People adapt by becoming detective, like in their attention to non-facial details, building their social memory through patterns of sound and movement rather than features. It serves as a reminder that identity gets stored across many different channels in our brains, not just in the visual recognition of faces that most of us rely on so heavily. Even more surprising is how the brain can hold on to skills, even when facts completely disappear. There are documented cases where someone cannot remember ever meeting you, yet over repeated sessions, they can learn and improve at new motor tasks. They might insist each time that they've never done the activity before, then proceed to perform it better than the previous session. This split reveals that skill learning gets stored in completely different areas from the kind of memory that records life events. It explains why habits can outlast stories, why you can forget your first driving lesson, but still know how to operate a car, why someone might lose all memory of piano lessons, yet find their fingers naturally falling into familiar patterns on the keyboard. In daily life, this is why practice often feels like it's sinking in, even when you can't consciously explain what you've learned. The how-to knowledge gets updated beneath your awareness, separate from your ability to remember the learning process itself. This separation becomes especially important in rehabilitation after certain brain injuries. Even when episodic memory becomes unreliable, the brain can still build new procedural pathways. It's a hopeful aspect of human resilience, showing that learning has multiple doors, multiple ways of encoding and preserving information. Memory, it turns out, is far less unified than we typically imagine. It's more like a collection of different systems that usually work together so seamlessly that we assume they're all part of one process. Understanding these distinctions helps reveal just how remarkably flexible and complex our minds really are. Memory disorders reveal something profound about how our minds actually work. When certain types of amnesia strike, they don't erase everything equally. Instead, they create this strange situation where someone can tell you vivid stories from their childhood, complete with all the details and emotions, but they can't remember meeting you just an hour earlier. It's like their brain has become a broken recording device, where the old tapes play perfectly, but new ones just won't stick. This selective forgetting shows us that memory isn't just one big filing cabinet that gets filled up over time. It's more like a complex factory with different assembly lines, and when one line breaks down, the others can keep running. The brain needs specific systems to turn fresh experiences into lasting memories, and when those systems get damaged, a person can end up living in what feels like an endless loop of the present moment. What makes this even more fascinating, and perhaps a bit heartbreaking, is that emotions can still flow through these damaged pathways. Someone might feel genuine warmth and comfort when a loved one visits, even though they won't be able to recall that person's name or recognize their face later. The feeling registers, but the facts don't stick. This tells us that our emotional memory and our factual memory travel on completely different tracks through the brain. These conditions force us to think about some pretty deep questions regarding who we really are. If you can't form new memories, if your personal story stops updating in the usual way, are you still the same person? Your core self remains, but your narrative gets frozen in time. It challenges our whole idea of what makes us continuous beings as we move through life. Sometimes, though, memory can surprise everyone by coming back in sudden bursts, People who have been living in confusion can experience these remarkable moments where everything snaps back into focus, like fog lifting from a landscape all at once. They might suddenly recognize family members, remember recent conversations, recall names and faces that seemed lost forever. These episodes can happen after a seizure ends, when a fever breaks, or as brain tissue heals from injury. The striking thing is how sudden and complete these returns can be. One moment someone is lost and confused, the next they're asking about things that happened last week with perfect clarity. These moments remind us that the brain is incredibly dynamic, constantly changing as chemistry shifts, inflammation rises and falls, or neural networks find new ways to connect. Even in everyday life, we get smaller versions of this phenomenon. You're trying to remember something, it's right on the tip of your tongue, and then someone says exactly the right word, and the whole memory floods back. Or you visit a place you haven't been to in years, and suddenly you're remembering conversations, smells, feelings from decades ago. The memories were there all along, just temporarily blocked, like a road that's been closed for construction. Alzheimer's disease follows its own particular pattern of memory loss that can be confusing for families to witness. The disease doesn't just randomly erase memories. Instead, it tends to steal the most recent ones first, while leaving older memories surprisingly intact for quite a while. Someone might forget a conversation from this morning, but remember their wedding day from 50 years ago, in perfect detail. This backward slide through time happens because forming new memories requires brain circuits that are particularly vulnerable to damage. These circuits are often among the first to be affected by the disease. Meanwhile, those older memories have been strengthened through decades of being revisited and retold. They've become more distributed throughout the brain, making them harder to completely erase. This is why music from someone's youth can still bring them joy and recognition, even when they can't remember what they had for breakfast. The disease doesn't erase the person underneath, it just changes which rooms in the house of memory can still be accessed. Parkinson's disease affects memory in a different way that often gets overlooked. Most people think of Parkinson's as purely a movement disorder, the tremors and stiffness that make headlines. But the same brain systems that control smooth movement also help us learn habits and automatic routines. When these systems get disrupted, it can become much harder to do things that once felt effortless. Someone might find that driving a familiar route now requires conscious concentration for every turn, every merge, every decision that used to happen automatically. The knowledge is still there, but the brain has trouble shifting from deliberate control into that smooth automatic mode we call habit. It's frustrating because they know what to do, but the doing requires so much more mental effort than it used to. This reveals something important about habits themselves. They're not just about willpower or practice, they're about biology. When the biological systems that support automatic behavior get disrupted, external cues become crucial. A steady rhythm, visual markers, consistent routines, these can help the brain piece together the sequence it's struggling to automate. Sleep disorders create their own subtle form of memory disruption that often goes unrecognized. You might spend 8 full hours in bed every night, but still wake up feeling like your brain can't hold on to new information. This happens because memory consolidation, the process of turning temporary experiences into lasting memories, depends on very specific stages of sleep occurring in the right order. When sleep gets fragmented by breathing problems, restless legs, or other disorders, these crucial stages get interrupted. The brain might cycle through light sleep over and over without ever reaching the deep phases, where memories get properly filed away. Some people don't even realize this is happening, because the brief awakenings don't register consciously, but the brain definitely notices. The result is that new information just won't stick, no matter how hard you try to learn it. You can read the same paragraph multiple times, repeat facts over and over, but they slip away like water through a sieve. Meanwhile, accessing older memories becomes more difficult too, as if the whole filing system is running on low power. This is why treating sleep problems can sometimes improve learning and memory more dramatically than any studying technique. Memory isn't just made during our waking hours when we're actively trying to learn things. It's actually finished at night, When the brain finally has the quiet time it needs to sort through the day's experiences and decide what's worth keeping for the long haul. Depression transforms memory into a curator that favors darkness. When someone experiences depression, their mind doesn't just feel heavy, it actually begins to select memories differently. The brain starts pulling up painful moments with startling clarity, while happy memories seem to fade into background noise. It's almost like having a librarian who keeps handing you the saddest books, while the cheerful ones get pushed to the highest shelf. This selective memory process creates a cruel cycle. The more negative memories that surface, the more the world appears to be a place where good things simply don't happen. Past disappointments start feeling like evidence that joy is impossible. The mind becomes convinced that every tomorrow will mirror yesterday's pain. What makes this even more complex is how attention works during depression. Focus turns inward, becoming narrow and intense. When you're walking through life with tunnel vision, you miss the small positive moments that usually get stored away. A stranger's smile, a perfect cup of coffee, sunlight hitting a window just right. These tiny experiences barely register. Later, when the mind searches for good memories, there's simply less material to work with. Time itself gets warped during depression. Days blur together into an endless grey sequence. Memories lose their texture, their specific details that make them feel real and alive. The past becomes a flat, colourless landscape. But here's something remarkable about the human brain. These patterns aren't permanent. When people receive support, whether through therapy, medication, or human connection, attention starts to expand again. As attention widens, the brain begins encoding experiences more completely. Good moments start getting captured and stored properly. Memory gradually transforms from an enemy into an ally in healing. Anxiety operates as memory's most distracting neighbor. An anxious brain is essentially a security system that never stops scanning for threats. This constant vigilance consumes enormous amounts of mental energy. When your mind is busy running through worst-case scenarios, it has very little capacity left for absorbing what's actually happening around you. Think about sitting in a meeting while anxiety is running the show. Your body is present, but your attention is elsewhere, calculating risks and preparing for disasters that may never come. Later, you realize the entire conversation passed by, like background noise. This isn't because anxious people are careless or inattentive by nature. It's because the brain is prioritizing survival signals over everything else. Anxiety also creates a strange effect where memories become uneven. The one awkward moment gets recorded in high definition, complete with every uncomfortable detail. Meanwhile, the peaceful parts of the same day disappear entirely. The mind becomes like a security guard who never takes a break, always watching, always ready. The solution isn't to force memory to work harder. That just adds more pressure to an already overloaded system. Instead, the goal is reducing that constant state of alert. Simple techniques like focused breathing, grounding exercises, and maintaining predictable daily routines can help calm the internal alarm system. When anxiety levels drop, attention naturally becomes available for encoding new experiences properly. Chronic stress acts like a slow poison for memory structures. Short bursts of stress can actually be helpful, sharpening focus and improving performance. But when stress signals stay elevated for months, the brain's physical architecture begins to change. Areas responsible for forming new memories become smaller and less connected. This isn't the brain malfunctioning, it's the brain adapting to what it perceives as a dangerous environment. When survival seems uncertain, the mind invests its resources in vigilance rather than learning. People often describe this as living in a fog. Names that used to come easily now slip away. Reading becomes difficult to absorb. The mind feels perpetually crowded with urgency and worry. What's truly fascinating is how much of this can be reversed. The human brain possesses remarkable plasticity, meaning it can restructure itself throughout life. When stress decreases and sleep quality improves, memory function often returns. Regular exercise, meaningful social connections, and spending time in safe, calm environments can help restore the brain's flexibility. This living organ continuously remodels itself based on the life you're living. Concussions create invisible bruises on memory's delicate circuits. A concussion doesn't require a dramatic injury or obvious external damage. Sometimes a seemingly minor impact can rattle the brain's internal wiring in ways that don't show up on standard medical scans. Neurons struggle with energy balance, and networks that normally work in perfect coordination become noisy and unreliable. People often describe this as being able to think, but not being able to hold on to thoughts. They might lose track of what they were saying mid-sentence. They open apps on their phones and immediately forget why. Words that used to flow easily now require effort to retrieve. This can feel terrifying because it seems like the mind itself is slipping away. In many cases, recovery happens naturally with proper rest and careful pacing. The key insight is that concussion injuries are often functional rather than structural. The brain operates as a living electrical system, and concussions disrupt its precise timing. Memory depends heavily on this timing, the synchronized firing of neurons across different regions. When timing gets disrupted, recall becomes unreliable. As the brain's internal clock heals and synchronizes again, clarity often returns. The human brain operates like a recording device that sometimes simply fails to press record. During certain types of seizures, people can walk around, have conversations, even perform complex tasks, yet none of it gets saved. The experience vanishes completely, leaving behind nothing but empty space where memories should be. These episodes don't always look like the dramatic seizures we might imagine. Sometimes a person just stares blankly for a few moments, or appears mildly confused, then snaps back to normal. But those minutes are gone forever, as if they never happened at all. The brain was awake, the eyes were open, but the recording mechanism had switched off. This reveals something profound about how fragile our sense of continuous experience really is. We assume that being conscious means we're automatically creating memories, but that's not always true. The brain needs stable electrical activity to encode new information properly. When seizures disrupt that stability, especially in areas like the hippocampus, the result is a complete gap in the timeline. It's unsettling to think about, really. How many moments might slip away without us even knowing? The person experiencing this kind of memory loss isn't doing anything wrong. Their brain is simply having a technical malfunction, like a camera with a broken recording button. Medical treatments can often reduce these episodes and protect memory formation. But the phenomenon shows us just how delicate the whole process is. We're not guaranteed to remember something just because we were there when it happened. Certain medications can create similar effects, leaving people awake and responsive while completely blocking new memory formation. In medical settings, doctors sometimes use this intentionally, so patients won't remember uncomfortable procedures. The person can talk, answer questions, even make jokes, but later they'll have no recollection of any of it. Outside of medical contexts, this becomes more concerning. Someone might make important decisions, sign documents, have serious conversations, then wake up the next day with no memory of what they did. It's like their brain's save function was temporarily disabled. Alcohol can work the same way. During a blackout, the person isn't unconscious. They're walking around, talking, participating in life, but their brain isn't storing any of it. The next morning brings a blank space where hours of experience should be. This separation between awareness and memory formation is fascinating from a philosophical standpoint. We tend to think of consciousness as one unified thing, but it's actually made up of many different processes that can be disconnected from each other. You can be awake without remembering, aware without recording. Pain adds another layer to this complexity. When something hurts, the brain treats it as an emergency signal that demands immediate attention. This makes sense from a survival perspective. Pain often indicates danger that needs to be addressed right away, but our attention has limits, and pain is incredibly good at monopolizing those resources. People living with chronic pain often describe feeling mentally foggy, like their thinking has slowed down. They struggle to find words, forget details more easily, have trouble concentrating on tasks, This isn't a sign of weakness or declining intelligence. It's simply what happens when a significant portion of the brain's processing power is constantly devoted to managing pain signals. The brain is essentially trying to do two demanding jobs at once: monitor the pain and handle everything else. Something has to give, and unfortunately, it's often memory and attention that suffer. New experiences don't get encoded as clearly. Details slip away more easily. The whole process of learning and remembering becomes much more effortful. Sleep problems make this even worse. Pain interferes with rest, and sleep is when the brain does much of its memory consolidation work. So people in chronic pain face a double challenge: less effective memory formation during the day, and less effective memory processing at night. But here's the hopeful part. When pain management improves, memory often improves too. It's not that the person's fundamental cognitive abilities have changed. It's that their brain finally has the bandwidth to do its job properly again. When pain quiets down, attention becomes available for other tasks, and memory can start functioning normally. This tells us something important about the nature of human experience. Our brains are constantly juggling multiple processes: attention, memory, pain, processing, awareness, and these systems can interfere with each other in complex ways. We're not as unified or consistent as we might like to think. We're more like a collection of different functions that usually work together, but can sometimes conflict. It makes you wonder about the reliability of our own experiences. How much of what happens to us actually gets stored? How many details slip away because our attention was focused elsewhere? How often do we think we're creating memories when we're actually just going through the motions? The brain's recording system is remarkable, but it's also surprisingly fragile. A seizure, a medication, chronic pain, even just being distracted can interfere with the process. Our sense of having a continuous, complete record of our lives might be more of an illusion than we realize. Our minds naturally turn information into stories, and this isn't just chance. When we link facts to a narrative, something remarkable happens. The brain gets a pathway to follow, like stepping stones across a stream. Instead of trying to grip isolated details, which slip away like water through fingers, we hold on to sequences that make sense. Imagine trying to remember a scientific concept. Now imagine placing that same concept inside a tiny drama. Something changes, something reacts, something matters. Even the simplest timeline can transform a slippery fact into something solid. This explains why we still remember the plot of books we read as children, but struggle to recall those endless lists we memorized in school. Stories create emotional hooks, moments of surprise that make information stand out from the background noise of daily life. When you turn a list of terms into a journey, you're not adding unnecessary decoration. You're building scaffolding for your memory. This scaffolding reduces the effort needed later because you can reconstruct details by simply following the narrative thread. The human brain possesses an ancient talent for navigating space. We can borrow this skill, turning it into a learning tool. When you visualize a familiar place, your childhood home perhaps, you can store different ideas in different rooms. A key concept might sit on the front steps, a supporting detail rests on the living room sofa. An important example waits by the kitchen window. Later, when you need to remember, recall becomes a gentle stroll rather than a frantic search. What makes this technique so effective is the stability of locations. Your mind knows exactly where the bathroom is, so it gives that memory a reliable address. This method can even calm anxiety during presentations, because you have a route to follow if your mind goes blank. You're not grasping at empty air, you're walking through familiar territory, collecting thoughts as you go. Smell operates on a completely different level than other memory triggers. A single scent can summon recall faster than any word or image. This speed happens because smell pathways connect directly to emotion and memory circuits, often bypassing the usual interpretation steps that other senses require. While words need to be processed and understood, smell arrives immediately, pulling up entire environments in a single breath. A trace of chlorine can instantly transport you to a childhood swimming pool, complete with the feeling of summer heat on your skin and the sound of distant laughter. The brain treats scent as crucial environmental information, something that could matter for safety, for belonging, for survival itself. These smell memories often remain unlabeled by language, stored quietly, until the right scent returns. Then suddenly, it's as if a door you never knew existed swings wide open. Something strange happens when we walk through doorways. The simple act of changing rooms can make us forget what we just planned to do. Your brain treats different locations as separate contexts, and context helps organize mental activity. When you enter a new room, the brain updates its understanding of the situation. Fresh cues take priority, and previous intentions can lose their grip on attention. This explains why you might head to the kitchen with a clear purpose, then stand there blankly, as if the thought simply evaporated. The intention was fragile, and the context shift weakened its hold. What's fascinating is that the memory often returns. If you go back to the original room, step back into that first space, and the old cues can revive the plan, like reloading a paused scene. This isn't a personal flaw, it's how an efficient brain organizes tasks. The mind uses physical space like a filing system, with doorways acting as separators between folders. If you want to resist this effect, try saying your goal out loud as you walk, or carry an object linked to the task. You're giving the memory a bridge across contexts. In a crowded, noisy room, you can ignore dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, but somehow, your name cuts through all that noise like a knife through butter. The brain treats self-related information as high-priority data. Your name connects to identity, to social belonging, to survival itself, so it receives special processing power. This effect extends beyond just your name, your birthday, your hometown, your personal goals. All of these self-linked cues get flagged by the mind because they might predict something important about your world. You can harness this bias intentionally. When you connect new information to yourself, it often sticks much better in memory. This doesn't mean making everything about you. Rather, it means creating personal hooks. Ask yourself how an idea relates to your life, your work, your curiosities. Self-relevance transforms abstract data into something your brain considers worth keeping. It's like switching on a spotlight in the memory system, illuminating what matters most. There's something peculiar about unfinished tasks. They seem to echo in our minds long after completed ones have faded away. Your brain has a strange preference. It actually holds on to unfinished tasks much tighter than completed ones. When you leave something halfway done, your mind creates this lingering tension, almost like a mental itch that refuses to go away. This tension serves a purpose, though. It keeps that unfinished goal active somewhere in the background of your thoughts, quietly waiting for you to return and close the loop. Think about it. When you stop working on a problem right in the middle, part of your brain never really stops working on it. The goal stays alive in your mental workspace, humming along beneath your consciousness. This is exactly why cliffhangers work so well. They exploit this natural tendency your brain has to keep incomplete stories running in the background, pulling you inevitably toward the next episode. It also explains why that unanswered email keeps popping into your head while you are trying to relax on the couch. Your brain is not being dramatic or petty. It is actually trying to protect that goal from disappearing entirely. There is something almost beautiful about how your mind refuses to let go of unfinished business, like a faithful guardian watching over incomplete dreams. This weird quirk of memory means that starting something can actually be more powerful than finishing it. At least when it comes to retention. Once you begin a task, your mind becomes much more likely to carry that thread forward through time. You can use this strange fact strategically. Stop your study session while things are going well, not when you are completely exhausted and frustrated. Leave a small puzzle sitting there, unfinished, almost like bait for your future self. Your brain will keep turning it over during the downtime, and when you come back to it later, re-entry becomes surprisingly smooth. The path back in has already been carved by your unconscious mind, working away while you were doing other things. Your memory works much better when you give it patterns to hold on to, rather than scattered individual pieces. When you look at a really long string of random letters, it becomes almost impossible to keep track of them all. But if you can recognize those same letters as several familiar groups, suddenly the whole thing becomes manageable. This process has a name, chunking, and it explains how people perform seemingly impossible memory feats. Chess masters can glance at a complex board position and remember it perfectly, not because they have superhuman memory capacity, but because they see meaningful clusters where beginners see chaos. Musicians do exactly the same thing. They do not try to memorize every single note as a separate object floating in space. Instead, they remember phrases, structures, and musical sentences that flow together. Chunking transforms many scattered pieces into one unified unit with its own internal logic and order. You can practice this in your daily learning. Instead of trying to memorize a random list, look for natural categories and groupings. Instead of memorizing a process as individual steps, look for larger stages and phases. Instead of memorizing a speech word by word, group it into beats and movements that build on each other. The goal here is not to compress information, just for speed. The real goal is to compress for meaning. When scattered information becomes a recognizable pattern, it becomes much easier to hold in your mind and much easier to retrieve when you need it later. Sometimes you can feel like you know something, even when the details have completely vanished. You walk into a place and feel absolutely certain you have been there before, yet you cannot recall when or why or with whom. That sensation is called familiarity, and it can exist independently from full detailed recollection. Familiarity is like a quick signal from your brain that something matches stored patterns, even when your brain cannot retrieve the specific episode attached to those patterns. This feeling serves a useful purpose. It helps you navigate the world quickly by telling you what is likely safe and known. But familiarity can also mislead you in interesting ways. A face might feel familiar because it resembles someone else entirely, or a storyline might feel true simply because it follows a common, predictable pattern. This is why you can recognize a name immediately, yet have no idea who that person actually is. Your brain is giving you a warm ping of recognition, not a complete file with all the details filled in. This separation between familiarity and detailed memory is part of what makes remembering so confusing sometimes. You can feel absolutely sure about something without being able to explain why you feel that way. The feeling itself is real and meaningful, but it is incomplete. It is more like an early signal than a finished answer. Babies form memories constantly, but most adults cannot retrieve those earliest experiences at all. Your very first years are not actually empty. Babies can learn complex patterns, recognize their caregivers, and remember daily routines, sometimes even after surprisingly long gaps in time. Yet most adults cannot pull up those early scenes as personal episodes they can replay in their minds. One reason for this mystery is that the brain systems supporting autobiographical recall are still developing during those early years. Early experiences get stored in forms that simply do not match the adult way of remembering and retrieving memories. Language plays a huge role here too. Once you can describe your own life in words, you can rehearse those descriptions, and rehearsal helps stabilize memories over time. Before language develops, experience might be stored more as pure sensations, expectations, and emotional templates rather than stories. You might not remember your very first home as a visual scene, yet you might feel inexplicably calm when you smell a certain soap or hear a rhythm that matches an old lullaby. Those are traces, fragments of the past that exist but cannot be accessed through normal recall. The past is definitely there, stored somewhere in your brain, but the access method has fundamentally changed as you grew up. It is almost like having important files saved in an old computer format. The information still exists, but your modern programs cannot open it the same way anymore. Childhood memories often become much simpler and cleaner each time you recall them. A memory might start as a messy, complicated scene with many moving parts and background details, then gradually become a clean, simple story you can tell in one smooth breath. This happens because each act of recall is also an act of summary and editing. You unconsciously select the key moment, trim away the background noise, and keep only what fits the meaning you took from that experience. Over time, the memory naturally loses its original texture and complexity. The weather on that day disappears, The exact words people said fade away. What remains is the lesson, the feeling, and the headline you repeat to yourself and others. Family storytelling can speed up this simplification process dramatically. If the same anecdote gets told at family gatherings over and over, it becomes polished for maximum laughter or comfort, and that polished version can actually replace the messy original memory entirely. This is not necessarily a loss, though. It is simply memory doing what it does best, turning the lived chaos of real experience into usable meaning you can carry forward. Still, it can be genuinely surprising when you meet someone from your distant past. They might remember completely different details from the same event, and suddenly you realize your simple, clean story was only one angle on a much larger and more complex day. The teenage years create an unusually large number of lifelong memories. Psychologists call this phenomenon the reminiscence bump. If you ask adults to name their most vivid memories, a noticeable cluster often appears from the teenage years and early adulthood. This period of life is absolutely packed with firsts: first real independence, first deep friendships outside family, first heartbreaks, and major risks. The brain is also building your core identity at incredibly high speed during these years, and identity makes experiences feel much more important and memorable. When something becomes part of who you believe you fundamentally are, it tends to stick around in memory much longer. There is also a cultural layer to this phenomenon. The music, fashion, and major world events during your adolescence become reference points you return to for decades, which keeps those specific memories active and accessible. Even completely ordinary scenes from those years can seem to glow with special significance, not because life was objectively richer then, but because your brain was tagging much more of it as defining and important for your future self. Later in life, these teenage years can feel almost larger than life, like they contained more actual living than other periods. The reminiscence bump creates a bright ridge on your personal timeline, a place where memory stored extra detail because your adult self was still being assembled, and every experience felt potentially crucial to who you might become. As people age, recall speed often slows down while accumulated knowledge stays surprisingly strong and stable. Many older people notice that names and specific details take much longer to retrieve. The right word feels tantalizingly close, but refuses to arrive on command. At the same time, knowledge built up over decades can remain genuinely impressive. Vocabulary, expertise, and life wisdom often stay stable and sometimes even continue to improve with age. This split can feel deeply frustrating because it makes you doubt your own mind even when your mind is still remarkably rich and capable. Part of what changes is simply speed. The brain becomes less quick at pulling up a specific file, especially under pressure or time constraints. Another change involves filtering. Older brains often become much better at ignoring irrelevant noise and distractions, which can actually support better judgment, even if raw recall becomes slower. The comforting truth hidden in all this is that slow access is definitely not the same thing as empty storage. Most of those memories are still there, waiting patiently, and they often return quite clearly when the right cues appear and the atmosphere is calm and unhurried. Aging is not really a simple, straightforward decline. It is more like a shift in how memory gets searched and how time gets used and prioritized by a brain that has accumulated decades of experience. Memory shifts its priorities as we get older, focusing less on the tiny details and more on what everything actually meant. Think about it. Your brain becomes this incredible meaning-making machine over the decades. An elderly person might completely forget the exact words someone used in a conversation, but they'll remember perfectly what that conversation revealed about the person's character. They might not recall the specific date when something important happened, but the way that event changed their whole outlook on life, that stays crystal clear. This isn't memory getting weaker, it's memory getting smarter. After all, when you're making decisions in life, knowing the deeper patterns and lessons matters way more than remembering random trivia. It's like the brain decides to become a curator instead of just a storage unit, keeping what's truly valuable and letting go of the clutter. This is actually why older people can give such incredible advice. They're carrying around decades worth of patterns, And patterns are built from meaning, not from individual facts. Sure, some people keep their detail memory sharp as they age, but the default seems to shift toward asking, so what does this all mean? And honestly, this can make their stories more powerful. The plot points might get fuzzy, but the message comes through clearer than ever. If you want to help someone recall specific details, gentle cues work wonders. A photograph, visiting a familiar place, giving them patient time to let the memories surface. But there's real value in this meaning-first approach. Memory starts looking less like a diary and more like wisdom. Now, here's something fascinating about bilingual minds. They can actually store memories with completely different emotional flavors, depending on which language was involved. If you speak multiple languages, you might notice that certain feelings hit differently depending on which language you're using. A compliment might feel warmer and more intimate in one language, while criticism might sting more sharply in another. Language isn't just words floating in space. Every language carries context. The sound of your childhood, the rules of your household, the entire social world where you first learned it. So memories that formed in one language come with their own emotional coloring. Tell a story in your first language, and it might bring back the exact mood of home. Tell that same story in a language you learned later, and it feels more distant, more like you're giving a report. This matters in therapy, in relationships, in the way you talk to yourself every day. Switching languages can change how easily certain memories surface and how hard they hit you emotionally. It's not that one language is more truthful than another. It's that each language connects to a different set of experiences, and memory travels along those connections like electricity through wires. Your first language can unlock memories that feel completely stuck in other languages. That first language gets wired into the earliest layers of your social world. It's the language of lullabies, childhood arguments, family nicknames, the rules that shaped your earliest understanding of how the world works. Because of that deep wiring, hearing your first language can reopen doors that seem permanently closed in other languages. A single phrase can bring back the exact sound of a relative's voice. A familiar expression can revive a scene from decades ago, not as a clear picture necessarily, but as this feeling of being young again, of being back in that original version of yourself. This is why people who learned a second language later sometimes feel more emotionally exposed when they're speaking their first language. Those words sit closer to their core identity, and that core identity connects to the deepest memory networks. Sometimes older adults who struggle to find words in their later languages can still speak their first language perfectly, especially when they're stressed or tired. Those older neural pathways seem more resilient, more permanent. Your first language isn't just a communication tool. It's like carrying around a master keyring that can unlock entire drawers of memory that got packed away before you even had the words to label what you were experiencing. Dreams take this whole memory mixing process and turn it completely wild. Dreams feel like total nonsense most of the time, but they're actually built from incredibly familiar ingredients. The brain grabs fragments from what happened recently, pulls up older memories, mixes in current emotional concerns, then blends it all into these brand new scenes that never actually existed. Your coworker shows up in your childhood bedroom. The hallway from your old school somehow turns into a busy train station. These mashups feel surreal, but they're revealing something important about how memory actually works. The brain isn't just replaying old footage while you sleep. It's experimenting, testing out new connections, exploring themes, sometimes even softening difficult emotions by moving them into completely different settings. This remixing process can actually boost creativity. When you wake up with some weird dream image stuck in your head, it can spark a real idea because it's linking concepts that would never meet under normal logical daytime thinking. Dreams aren't perfect messages from some deep unconscious mind, but they're definitely not random noise either. They're your memory networks in motion, running without the usual rules, discovering new pathways through everything you're already carrying around. Here's where it gets really wild. Lucid dreamers can sometimes send signals to the outside world while they're still completely asleep. In lucid dreaming, part of your mind realizes, in the middle of the dream, that it's actually dreaming. What makes this especially mind-bending is that some dreamers can communicate that awareness to researchers who are monitoring them. During sleep, most of your muscles are essentially offline, but eye movements still show through. Lucid dreamers can use planned eye movement patterns as signals, like tapping on a window from inside the dream state. Researchers have actually used this to ask simple questions and get answers back through eye codes or tiny facial movements. The communication is pretty limited, but the implications are enormous. Part of your mind can be fully immersed in dreaming, while another part is tracking instructions and responding deliberately. It's like having a split-screen form of consciousness running simultaneously. For memory research, lucid dreaming is particularly interesting because awareness seems to make dreams more stable and easier to remember after waking up. It can also let dreamers practice skills or confront fears in a somewhat controlled environment. The sleeping brain isn't completely sealed off from the world. Sometimes it can actually wave back. And here's something that sounds almost like science fiction. A sound played during sleep can actually strengthen one specific memory that you choose in advance. If you pair learning something with a particular sound, that sound can later work like a handle that the sleeping brain can grab onto. In laboratory studies, people learn information while a soft audio cue plays in the background, maybe a specific tone or gentle sound. Later, during sleep, researchers play that same cue very quietly, not loud enough to wake the person up. The brain can actually reactivate the memory trace that was linked to that sound, like briefly reopening a file to reinforce it. By morning, people's recall for the material that got the audio cue during sleep improves compared to similar material that didn't get cued. It's not a magic shortcut to knowledge you never actually learned. It's more like a way of strengthening what you already put down in memory. The really intriguing part is that this whole process happens while consciousness is completely offline. Your brain is still listening, still sorting for information, still making decisions about what deserves to stick around permanently. The night isn't just about rest and recovery. It's active rehearsal, and sometimes a simple sound can guide that rehearsal in directions you never knew were possible. The human brain treats memories like a personal filing system, but it files things based on what your culture taught you mattered. If you grew up hearing stories about family loyalty, your mind learns to notice moments when people stuck together. If your culture prizes individual achievement, you'll naturally file away memories about personal wins and losses. This happens because stories work like training manuals for your brain. Every tale your grandmother told, every movie you watched as a kid, they all whispered instructions about which pieces of life deserve storage space. Your mind absorbs these patterns without asking permission. Some cultures teach people to remember events as webs of relationships. Who was there, how everyone felt, what it meant for the group. Other cultures frame memories around personal decisions and private moments. Neither approach is right or wrong. They're just different lenses for viewing the same human experience. The fascinating part is how family stories can actually reshape your own memories. When relatives retell the same moment over and over, that story becomes easier for your brain to access. It starts feeling more important than other events that happened around the same time. The repeated story gets brighter, while other memories fade into background noise. This raises curious questions about the nature of truth. Are your memories really yours if they've been polished by years of family storytelling? Perhaps authenticity matters less than meaning. Maybe memories serve us better as guides than as historical records. Your brain also runs a quiet navigation system that works without conscious effort. Place memory operates like an invisible map, recording landmarks and distances while you think about completely different things. You might walk through your neighborhood planning dinner or replaying a conversation, yet your mind still notes the broken streetlight, the house with red shutters, the corner where the sidewalk dips down. Later, these tiny details become breadcrumbs leading you home. A single visual cue can activate the whole route. The smell from a particular restaurant, the sound of wind through certain trees, the way shadows fall across a familiar building. Your body follows these signals even when your conscious mind can't explain the path in words. When familiar landmarks disappear, the disorientation feels almost physical. It's like someone erased part of your internal compass. This system evolved because knowing your territory meant survival. Your ancestors needed to find food sources, avoid dangers, and return to safety. That ancient need still guides how your brain organizes spatial information. Walking through an old school or childhood neighborhood can unlock memories that seemed completely lost. The environment acts like a key, opening doors in your mind that haven't been touched for years. The place doesn't just remind you of the past, it actually recreates the mental state you had when those memories formed. Taste memory operates with a different purpose entirely. Your brain treats flavor as potential evidence in an ongoing survival investigation. Every bite gets evaluated for safety. When something you eat makes you sick, your mind creates an immediate warning label. The connection between that taste and danger can last for decades. This response is so powerful, it can override rational thinking. You might know logically that your illness came from a virus, not from the pizza you happened to eat that day. But your brain doesn't care about logic when it comes to potential poison. The taste association feels wrong at a gut level, literally. This makes evolutionary sense when you consider how dangerous unfamiliar foods could be for our ancestors. Better to avoid something unnecessarily than to risk death from toxic plants or spoiled meat. Your taste memory system would rather make 10 false alarms than miss one real threat. Smell plays a crucial role because it serves as an early warning system. You can detect danger through scent before anything touches your tongue. That's why certain smells can trigger nausea, even when you're not eating anything. Your brain learned to connect that scent with the memory of illness. The system isn't designed to be fair or accurate. It's designed to be fast and decisive. In a world where hesitation could mean death, quick judgments about food safety provided a survival advantage. We inherited this hair-trigger response even though most of us live in much safer food environments now. Pain memory follows its own peculiar logic, often distorting experiences in ways that influence future decisions. Your brain rarely stores pain with photographic accuracy. Instead, it creates a compressed file that captures the general experience along with key emotional details. The mind tends to remember the worst moment of pain and how the experience ended. A medical procedure that started terribly but finished with relief might be remembered more positively than one that was mild but ended with complications. This editing process happens automatically, without your conscious involvement. These distorted pain memories become powerful decision-making tools. If your brain filed away a dental visit as extremely traumatic, you might avoid necessary dental care for years. If your mind downplayed a serious injury, you might take similar risks again, not fully appreciating the danger. Expectation also colors pain memory in real time. When you anticipate something will hurt, your nervous system becomes more sensitive. The brain prepares for threat by lowering its pain threshold. Conversely, feeling safe and supported can actually reduce how much something hurts, both in the moment and in memory. This reveals something profound about the relationship between mind and body. Pain isn't just a simple signal reporting tissue damage. It's a complex experience shaped by context, expectation, and meaning. Your brain constantly interprets physical sensations through emotional and social filters. The goal isn't deception, it's efficiency. Your mind compresses complex experiences into useful guidelines for future behavior. These simplified memories help you navigate similar situations without having to analyze every detail from scratch. The compression sacrifices accuracy, but gains speed and clarity for decision-making. Your brain doesn't just record pain, it actively constructs how much something hurt based on countless factors that happened before, during, and after the experience. The memory of pain becomes its own kind of reality, separate from whatever actually occurred in that moment. What's fascinating is how your mind starts building memories before events even happen. When you're looking forward to something, whether it's exciting or terrifying, your brain begins crafting a kind of mental scaffolding. You imagine scenarios, you rehearse conversations, you attach feelings to things that haven't occurred yet. This preparation process can make the actual experience easier to remember later, because there's already a framework waiting for it, but it also means your expectations shape what you'll remember. If you're convinced someone will reject you, you'll notice every tiny signal that seems to confirm that fear. If you expect warmth and connection, those are the details that will stand out. It's almost like choosing the camera angle before filming a scene. Your anticipation directs your attention, and attention determines what gets filed away in your memory banks. This explains why periods of waiting often feel so vivid when you look back on them. You weren't just experiencing the present moment, you were simultaneously living through multiple predicted futures. The strange thing is how imagination and memory use remarkably similar brain circuits. When you remember something from your past, and when you imagine something that might happen tomorrow, your brain employs overlapping machinery for both tasks. Both processes involve assembling scenes from pieces, combining people, places, emotions, and sensations into coherent narratives. This overlap serves useful purposes. You can mentally rehearse a difficult conversation before having it. You can visualize a route before traveling somewhere new. You can practice presentations in your mind, working through potential problems before they arise. But there's a curious downside to this system. When you imagine something repeatedly, it starts to feel familiar. And familiarity can easily be mistaken for truth. This is why daydreams sometimes feel oddly real, in hindsight, why you might remember conversations that never actually happened, why visualizing success can be both powerful and misleading if you confuse mental rehearsal with actual achievement. Your brain operates like a sophisticated simulator, and that simulation draws from memory ingredients. The imagined worlds you create are built from the same fundamental building blocks as your remembered experiences. When the boundary between imagination and memory blurs, it's not because you're being careless or inattentive. It's because your brain efficiently reuses the same neural tools for multiple purposes. Sometimes this reuse creates confusion between what happened and what you wished had happened. Between what you experienced and what you feared might happen. The brain's efficiency comes with occasional mix-ups that can feel surprisingly convincing. Much of what you think is straightforward perception is actually prediction. Your brain constantly guesses what will happen next, using stored patterns from past experiences to make these forecasts. If you've learned that stoves are hot, you pull your hand back before touching. If you've learned that a particular friend's silence means they're upset, you respond before they even speak. These memory-based predictions make daily life remarkably efficient because you don't have to solve every situation from scratch. But this predictive ability also shapes what you notice and what you miss. You tend to see what you expect, and you overlook details that don't fit your mental models. This can be incredibly helpful when you're in familiar environments, but potentially risky when you encounter genuinely new situations. Your brain's prediction system is essentially a shortcut that saves mental energy, which also explains how habits form so easily. The brain recognizes patterns, then automates responses based on those patterns. Memory isn't just a tool for looking backward at what already happened. It's also a navigation system for steering toward what comes next. Your future choices are quietly guided by an invisible library of patterns you've already lived through, experiences that inform decisions in ways you might not even realize. The conditions under which you form memories matter tremendously. You remember best when you feel safe, calm, and genuinely focused. A brain that perceives threat is designed for escape, not for learning. When you feel secure, your nervous system can shift out of high alert mode, and attention becomes much steadier. Steady attention provides memory formation with a clean signal to work with. Calmness also reduces interference from competing mental processes. If your mind is racing with worry, new information has to compete with all that internal noise for space in your memory system. Focus becomes the final crucial ingredient. Even in a perfectly safe environment, you can lose effective memory formation if your attention keeps fragmenting. This explains why a quiet, focused study session often produces better results than hours of anxious, distracted effort. It also reveals why supportive environments matter so profoundly for learning. When people feel judged or criticized, they often remember the emotional experience of judgment more vividly than whatever lesson was being taught. When they feel supported and encouraged, they can actually store the intended content. Safety in this context doesn't mean comfort in every single moment. It means your nervous system believes you can handle whatever challenge you're facing. When that fundamental belief is present, the brain opens its learning channels wide, and memory formation becomes far more reliable and lasting. Memory isn't like a photograph sitting unchanged in some dusty album. Every time you remember something, your brain actually rebuilds that memory from scratch. It's more like a story that gets retold, and with each telling, small details might shift. Your current emotions, your recent experiences, even your mood today, all of these things influence how you reconstruct what happened before. The brain doesn't just pull out a perfect recording. It pieces together fragments, fills in gaps, and colors everything with who you are right now. This means that strict teacher from your childhood might feel different when you remember them as an adult. Maybe back then they seemed harsh, unfair, but now, with years of perspective, you might see someone who was struggling, overwhelmed, doing their best with limited tools. The actual events didn't change, but the meaning did. Sometimes this updating process brings relief. A scary moment from your past might lose its sharp edges when you understand the context better. Other times it works the opposite way. Something that seemed innocent might feel heavier once you have words for what really happened. This fluidity of memory can feel unsettling. We like to think our past is solid, fixed, reliable. But each time you revisit a memory, you bring your present self along for the journey. Your current knowledge adds layers, changes the lighting, shifts the focus. The brain doesn't store memories just to preserve history. Memory exists to help you navigate what's happening now. And for navigation, you need meaning more than perfect accuracy. Raw facts without context don't guide decisions very well. This is where forgetting becomes surprisingly important. If your brain held on to every single detail with equal clarity, you'd be drowning in information. Imagine trying to recognize a friend's face while simultaneously remembering every single time you'd ever seen them. The mental noise would be overwhelming. Forgetting acts like a filter. It lets certain details fade while preserving the patterns, the emotional significance, the useful lessons. This isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. Without forgetting, you couldn't generalize from experience. Every situation would feel completely unique and disconnected. Think about learning to drive. At first, every turn, every parking space, every traffic light demands intense focus. But as details of individual drives fade, patterns emerge. You develop intuition about speed, timing, spatial relationships. The forgetting of specifics allows the learning of principles. Memory interference is another fascinating challenge the brain solves through selective forgetting. If you remembered every single place you'd ever parked your car with perfect clarity, finding today's parking spot would become nearly impossible. All those similar concrete structures and painted lines would blur together, competing for attention. Instead, your brain lets most parking memories fade quickly, while keeping just enough recent detail to guide you back to your car. It's an elegant solution to an information management problem. The emotional weight of memories changes too, as certain aspects fade while others remain vivid. Traumatic experiences often become less sharp over time, not because the events weren't significant, but because healing sometimes requires letting go of the most painful details while keeping the wisdom they provided. This isn't about denying what happened or pretending difficult experiences don't matter. It's about the brain's natural tendency to extract meaning while releasing unnecessary suffering. The lesson remains, the growth stays, but the raw, emotional intensity can soften. Different types of memories follow different rules too. Your ability to ride a bicycle lives in a completely different system than your memory of learning to ride. One is stored in your muscles, your reflexes, your unconscious coordination. The other is a story with characters, emotions, probably some embarrassing falls. These memory systems can work independently. Someone with severe memory loss might forget they ever learned to play piano, but their fingers still remember the scales. The skill persists even when the story disappears. Attention plays a crucial role in what gets remembered in the first place. Your brain is constantly bombarded with sensory information, but only a fraction of it gets encoded into lasting memory. The things that capture your focus, that seem important or emotionally significant, these get priority treatment. Sleep then takes over, quietly organizing the day's experiences. During those hours of unconsciousness, your brain is actually quite busy, replaying important events, strengthening useful connections, clearing out mental clutter. Dreams might be part of this process, strange theater productions, where memories get sorted and filed. Scents have a particularly powerful connection to memory. The smell of fresh bread might instantly transport you to your grandmother's kitchen, complete with the sound of her voice and the texture of worn wooden counters. This happens because smell connects directly to brain areas involved in emotion and memory, bypassing some of the usual processing filters. Music works similarly, but through different pathways. A song from decades ago can bring back not just memories of when you first heard it, but the feelings, the physical sensations, even the weather that day. These sensory triggers access memory networks that conscious effort often can't reach. Confidence in memory doesn't always correlate with accuracy. You can feel absolutely certain about details that have actually drifted over time. This isn't dishonesty or delusion, it's just how the reconstruction process works. The brain fills gaps with plausible details and presents the result with conviction. Stress hormones can both help and hinder memory formation. Moderate stress might sharpen focus and improve encoding of important events. But chronic stress or trauma can fragment memories, making them harder to organize into coherent narratives. Understanding memory as a living, changing system rather than a static storage device offers a different perspective on human experience. Your past continues to evolve as you do. The stories you tell about your life aren't lies when they change over time, they're updates. New chapters cast different light on earlier ones. This flexibility serves you well. It allows growth, healing, learning from experience. A fixed, unchanging past would leave no room for wisdom, forgiveness, or new understanding. Memory's fluidity is part of what makes humans adaptable, resilient, capable of finding new meaning in old experiences.